Chapter 701. Well, at least the chains patched you up just fine. Let's move. Yandra said. What about the others? Raynor asked. Good question. Yandra sneered, looking at her colleagues who had yet to move a finger. My assistant Nilla died at the hands of the fungal creature. I have no obligation towards any of these kids. I already failed to protect myself. Taking care of someone else is out of the question. Gaka said. I'm sorry, Onma, but Professor Gaku is right. Elka said. I promise you that if I manage to escape from here, I'll send the whole army to your rescue. If I fail, I hope you'll be able to kill me, because whatever the ODI have planned for us, I'm certain it's worse than death. But all of you are powerful mages. Raynor stuttered. Quilla's voice calling him a coward still echoed in his head, driving him to be a better man. Is there really nothing you can do? Kid, grow up. Gaka said. Saving everyone, beating the odds, those are all fairy tales. I bet that our story will end with, and then they died too. If Yandra wants to burden herself with you, it's none of my business. She then freed the imprisoned soldiers, who immediately started to eat and drink to recover their strength. As the head of the expedition, in the absence of Captain Ernaz, I'm the highest-ranked officer. Gaka said, I order you to help me find a way out of Kola to alert the kingdom of the threat the ODI still pose. Is that clear? The soldiers gave her a salute, turning to look at the weeping assistants only once. As members of the military, they were all too familiar with collateral damage, but that didn't mean that they liked it. Yet, there was nothing they could do. The assistants had proved to be dead weight more than once. Sure, the soldiers had fallen by the hands of the golems as well, but they had gone down fighting, not crying and begging for mercy. Floria's soldiers had all someone waiting for them at home, and none of them was willing to die for nothing. They would either get out of there or die trying to alert the kingdom. Everything and everyone else was irrelevant. You heard her. She only cares about herself. Yandra whispered to Elkas while her esteemed colleague was playing her part as Yandra had predicted. I need you to read the ODI gibberish, and you need me to operate the ODI technology. Deal. Elkas nodded and shook her hand. The door to the prison was open as well, which gave everyone an eerie feeling. It could only mean that no one had ever managed to escape. They entered in a wide room, from which branched several corridors, each one with its own tag. Gaku guided the soldiers in the second hallway to her right, without even looking at her colleagues. Where is she going? Yandra asked. To the warehouse. Elkas replied before reading and pointing the other signs one at a time. Mana reactor, meat shields, golem factory, bathrooms, administrative office, stairs, and canteen. It's a good idea. That's why we'll go to the meat shields room. Yandra said after scanning the corridor of her choosing. And why is that? Elkas trusted no one, but at least Yandra needed him. He was afraid of outliving his usefulness and needed to be ready to fend for himself. Because when she triggers the alarm, because she will, I want to be as far away as possible. Plus, Lith and Floria took a look at the room and told us what kind of arrays we can expect. It's our safest bet. Elkas nodded, realizing that the ODI must have had prepared multiple exit points for their guards, and maybe one of them was near a town whose name he might be able to recognize. Yet he kept that idea for himself. After abandoning his own assistant, leaving Yandra behind to increase his chances of survival was easy as cake. Meanwhile, on the upper floor, Lith and Floria had reached the door leading to the research R. The flesh golems had managed to find them a few times only to witness the humans warping away. With the cameras down, Lith was free to go back to any place he had previously visited, forcing the constructs to split up and search for them. Now this is the reason why I waited. Lith used invigoration on the others, restoring about half their strength. How long was I unconscious, and where are we? Neshel asked while stretching her limbs. 3 hours. Lith replied. Barely 10 minutes had passed. His lie almost made Floria yelp in surprise. We decided to rest before moving, but we were forced to warp several times to avoid the golems. Thanks for letting me rest, and for not leaving me behind. Neshel gave Lith a deep bow. Now let's get out of here. While she operated the door, Morok and Quilla wolfed down quite some food, both amazed by their perfect physical condition despite all the wounds they had sustained. Just watching them made Floria hungry, forcing her to eat again. Bad news. This door is full of arrays, but none of them is linked to the lock. They are all linked to that slot. Neshel pointed to the keycard reader. which means this is a work for a forge master. After thanking her for the great news, Lith chanted gibberish and used invigoration. Just as he hoped, there were 2 relays again, but this time only the wrong one was linked to the arrays. All he had to do was to send a pulse of mana to the relay associated with the lock to make it click. Sure, a keycard energy signature is much harder to mimic compared to a key, but with such a design, I don't need to. Lith thought. Unlike the hollow pads on the upper floor, there is no such thing as repetition or correct order of characters, only right or wrong impulse. Against a true mage, it's like not having a lock at all. Good gods, I should have learned forge mastering. Neshel thought. No one of us knows how to read the ODI, but at least if we can open all the rooms, we are bound to find a way out. Without Gaku and Yandra, these guys are my best bet. Quilla had taken down more golems than anyone else. Morok seemed to be immortal, and Lith appeared to Neshel's eyes like a genius. They found themselves in a T-junction with several doors spaced between them so much that each room had to be as big as a hotel suite. Wait, before we continue, I need to know which array do you prefer? Earth blocking, air blocking, or the power detection? Neshel asked. Can't we have them all? Morok asked. You wish. Keeping an entire magical formation at the ready is already draining. 2 would make me collapse in just a few minutes. Do you have more of those enchanted nails? Lith asked. Yes, but the last time the golems were completely still. I can't kill them on my own if that's what you're asking me. Neshel replied. Then the power detection. That way all 3 of us can destroy the golems and use dimensional magic. Okay, Floria and Morok nodded at. Chapter 702. Meanwhile, the ODI had mixed feelings about the most recent developments. They had lost more than half of their so-called invincible army, and for the first time in centuries, they had prisoners yet had managed to let them escape. The silver lining was that among the runaways there was at least one person able to understand their language. Gaku had decided to prioritize speed over stealth since disabling the cameras would reveal her position anyway. Unbeknownst to her, it had allowed the ODI to notice how she checked every sign before deciding where to go. This solves all of our problems. Jaira said, we only need to preserve this monkey and the youths to have full access to the outside world. It's time to take out the trash. Litha's group moved along the corridors, being forced to explore them all in search of a way to reach the floors below. While their companions were unconscious, Lith had shared with Floria the golem's dying words. She was glad to know they had an edge over their hidden enemies and shared Litha's amazement at his ability to understand the dead language even though he was unable to read it. Could his death vision curse and the near-death state of those wretched creatures be the explanation for the phenomenon? Floria thought, I hope I'm wrong. Otherwise it might mean that Litha's condition is even worse than what the professors assessed. The place was completely empty, but thanks to the reinforced glass windows, they could watch inside each room, and Floria could use her Forge Master spells to look for dimensional runes. The underground labs were completely different from those on the upper level of Kulla. They were all clean, with no chains nor cells. Each room was full of a mix of magic and machinery, the ODI's signature technique to overcome the limits of ancient runes. The labs were designed to host a full research team, but only 2 specimens at the time. Clearly, they used them to perform the perfected procedures on the ODI, or just to fine-tune the last details. They found both an elevator and the stairs, but being cramped in a confined space with the risk of the golems warping with them was a no-go, so they preferred to take the stairs to reach the lower floor. Anything useful, Solus? Lith asked while opening the keycard locks one after another. Nope, but stay on your guard. I'm surprised that the ODI haven't used their meat shields more, nor did they move to face us. After centuries of practice, and with their ego, they should believe to be unbeatable. Solus replied. Lith was pondering about her words when a more pressing problem arose. There were 2 corridors in front of them, one to the left and the other to the right, and above each one of them multiple tags were hung. Both corridors branched into many others, and since no one was able to read the ODI language nor the room had windows, the floor was akin to a maze to them. What do we do now? Lith asked everyone, Solus included. The golems had warned them about a green array and prompted them to reach the basement. But that information had become pointless. Open these goddamn doors one by one, and as soon as we find a dimensional rune, if there isn't that noxious gas on the other side we leave, period. Neshel said. Floria had many objections to leaving behind her soldiers, the professors, and the assistant. Not because it would have been an utter failure on her personal file, but because after all the time they had spent together, she considered them almost as friends. Yet not knowing if they were even still alive and the idea of joining them on an ODI's operating table left her with no choice. She pointed at the closest door and nodded for Lith to open it. Using live vision, Lith could see that there were no life forces inside, so he did as instructed and looked inside. The room turned out to be an archive, full of cabinet files and orderly placed folders. Lith closed the door while shaking his head when Solus warned him. They're opening gates. From what direction? He asked. All of them. Lith had barely the time to alert the others when warp steps opened at the end of each corridor. A flesh golem stepped out of each one of them, unleashing a fireball as large as the corridor itself. Neshel activated her power detector array, keeping herself ready to blink to safety. Lith was aware that each time he opened a lock he gave out his position, but he couldn't warp to unknown locations. To make matters worse, that kind of attack was clearly meant to force them to split. The golems had waited for the humans to be in a place impossible to defend before using a spell that could be dodged but not blocked. The moment Lith's group blinked it was over. Metal walls fell from the ceiling, blocking both their view and their path to retreat. How did we miss them? Lith couldn't believe his own eyes. They are not magical, but mechanical in nature. None of us has gear sense. Solus explained. Lith blinked near the golem's power core, pretending to follow the enemy script. But instead of aiming for a direct strike, he blinked away to dodge the attack he knew was about to come and use the opening it would create to kill his enemy. Unfortunately, together with its attack, the golem also activated a water-blocking array, sealing dimensional magic. Thanks to his enhanced reflexes, Lith managed to block the construct's fist but took the full power of the fireball accompanying it. Only the skinwalker armor boosted by his mana and earth fusion saved his life. Close combat wasn't Neshel's specialty, so she had kept away from the construct. Unfortunately, with dimensional magic sealed, she was soon overwhelmed. Keeping the array at the ready had required most of her focus. She had few spells to protect herself. She couldn't even access her dimensional item, leaving her with only the means she had on her pockets and fingers. Fuck, she said while unleashing all the spells she kept inside her magic storing rings. Some of them were even tier 4 and 5. A jet stream of flames thousands of degrees hot struck the golem, instantly followed by a blazing tornado. Neshel chanted as fast as she could, timing the release of the spell so that to buy herself as much time as she could. The only good thing about being isolated from the others was that the walls also protected her allies from her most powerful spells. If I hold on long enough, they'll come for me, she thought. Yet the golem just kept protecting its core with its arms while walking forward, ignoring the blazing inferno Neshel had created and attacking with more fireballs of its own. With no earth nor ice to manipulate, Neshel couldn't block them, nor she could blink away. The first explosion made her eyes bleed and brought her eardrums on the verge of bursting. She kept attacking despite being blind, but the second explosion broke through her magical protections and made her cough out blood. The golem undid its array and warped in front of her, clutching her head with its half-melted hand. Luckily, the golem killed her before she could feel the heat that charred her bones and made her blood evaporate. Chapter 703. The heat from the fireball was burning Litha's lungs while the light blinded him, but by switching to life vision, he became able to see again. He unleashed a burst of origin flames, which the golem shrugged off as if they were nothing more than a parlor trick. Flesh golems were so heavily enchanted that a single breath of origin flames could barely heat their stone surface due to the powerful magic coursing through their bodies that amounted to several tier 5 spells. The construct struck with its fists again, activating even more fireballs. Lith was exactly in Neshel's situation. He couldn't block nor dodge the enemy's spells, yet he had one more means of defense. Instead of wasting his origin flames to attack, he used them to cancel the fireballs as he stepped back to avoid the physical attacks. Origin Flame's greatest weak point was that it required him to exhaust the air in his lungs, leaving him breathless. Beware, this thing isn't trying to take you alive. Solus warned him. The golem had no idea what was happening, so it tried to switch to darkness magic, only to have its black waves devoured by Litha's blue flames. Lith infused his prototype gatekeeper with air magic to boost its speed and piercing abilities, but thanks to the mix of earth and air magic the construct used to move its body, the golem was as fast as an awakened. The stone fist shattered the blade before it could get even 1 centimeter under its skin. The other fist struck at Lith like a charging bull, making him bounce on the floor before sending him crashing against the back wall. Even with the boosted protection of the Skinwalker armor and Solus promptly covering his chest to shield him, Litha's vision was blurred and his focus lost. He used invigoration to recover his strength, but it felt like a fool's errand. Magic was useless, and so were physical attacks. Lith refused to surrender and used a sudden wave of spirit magic to lift the opponent and sending it slamming against a wall. The golem was surprised but unfazed by the invisible energy, so it just resumed its magical onslaught, forcing Lith to interrupt his breathing technique to use origin flames to save his life. A sudden explosion and the golem's power core becoming invisible again made Lith aware of Neshel's death. Lith racked his brain for a path to victory, but he kept not finding any. Damn, golems are too powerful. Now I understand why the ODI made the entirety of Kulla out of metal. Without earth to manipulate against them, they are nigh invincible. Lith thought. I have only 1 shot left, but I need your help, Solus. It's dangerous and likely to fail. You could remain. Just do it. She replied while reading his mind. Lith took a breath as deep as he could before hurling a wall of flames against the construct. It ate all of the incoming spells, sticking on both the flesh and the stone parts of the golem, leaving the creature blinded as its human side suffered in agony. The moment the flames struck, Lith bolted forward, infusing himself with all the elements and striking at the power core hidden inside the golem's left thigh. Just like it had happened for the sword, the moment his claws pierced its rock skin, the construct's fists fell down like hammers, shattering Litha's arm in several places and sending him sprawling on the floor like a rag doll. The golem lifted its foot to shatter Litha's skull, but suddenly it lost its balance and fell to the ground. Solus's glove had detached at the last second, using the blue flames as a cover and the hit's momentum to reach the power core. The golem had failed to notice the damage she had inflicted due to origin flames dulling its senses and its lack of sense of pain. However, victory came at a cost. Lith was barely conscious, and so was Solus. Between the origin flames and the construct's attacks, she was heavily wounded. It took her several seconds to collect all of her pieces spread throughout the room and return to his side. Lith used invigoration again, knowing that until Solus recovered, using that trick a second time might kill them both. Floria had blinked while holding Quilla, foiling the ODI's plan to split them. She knew that her sister wouldn't last a second alone against the construct. When Floria blinked again, much to the construct's surprise, she was running away along the path they had taken to get there instead of facing it. It made the golem's array useless and forced it to give them chase. Any idea? She asked Quilla. They were just around the corner. Instead of wasting her mana, Floria had opted for hide and strategize. None. If I can't touch the golem, I'm useless. Even if I can see its power core, I doubt it will let me strike it well. Quilla, does indirect contact work for Tier 5 healing magic? Floria asked. Only if I touch a living being. I can't transmit scanner through metal. Good enough for me. Stay close to me, no matter what. Floria would have liked to blink by Litha's side, but with their visual obstructed, she had no idea which direction he had gone, nor she could warp to an unknown location. Lith had just recovered enough to stand up when his nose picked up an odd smell. Following it, he noticed a small hole in one of the metal walls that separated him from his companions. It allowed whoever was on the other side to look at Litha's position. A split second later, Morok blinked in front of him. His clothes were tattered to the point of being rags. Even an army uniform would take some time to recover from such damage, yet the ranger looked all right. Man, I hate golems. No vitals, immunity to most forms of magic, terrifying recovering abilities. They are a pain in the ass even for those like us. Us, Lith echoed, not understanding the meaning of Morok's words. Come on, there's no need to be shy. There's just the two of us now. How the heck did you get rid of the golems so fast, and how did you pierce that wall? Lith asked, still incapable of making heads of tails of those words. Fine. I'll show you mine, and then you'll show me yours. Yet instead of taking off his clothes, Warlock shape-shifted. His skin became snow white, with only one big red eye in the middle of his forehead. Another eye the size of a football appeared on his chest, and two more on his shoulders. His appearance was still humanoid, but he was now over 2 meters, 6 feet 7 inches, tall. His nose had disappeared, leaving only 2 slits on his face, and his mouth was full of several rows of shark-like teeth. Lith recognized immediately the emperor beast known as Tyrannical Eye, or just as Tyrant. They were the magical beast equivalent of Balers, but unlike them, tyrants weren't part of the fallen races, and their mastery over the elements wasn't as developed. All those abilities, they didn't belong to your weapons, it was you all along. Lith finally understood many things, like his fellow rangers' heightened senses and inhuman battle prowess. Solus, you told me he wasn't an awakened. Lith thought. He's not. Morok is just like Gadorf, the offspring of an emperor beast. She replied. Chapter 704. There's no point in denying it. Morok said. Between your fancy glove and all of your trinkets, I would have bought your act if it wasn't for your smell, brother. You need to fix that. How did you kill the golem? Lith repeated his question. He preferred to avoid explaining that he could do nothing about it. Unlike Morok, he didn't just shapeshift. He had 2 different life forces with a unique smell. My old man refused to awaken me, but at least he gave me a nice gift. Morok juggled with his weapons before sheathing them. They can absorb and enhance the power of my eyes, giving me plenty of tricks. Balers are losers compared to tyrants. We evolved correctly, and it's only a matter of time before we outmatch them in every aspect. His smile was full of spite, pronouncing the name of their rival species as if it was poison. Don't get startled. I'm not a Baler, Lith said while assuming his hybrid form. What the fuck? Even though he had been forewarned, Morok jumped back, unsheathing his blades. Was your father a dragon who mated with a Baler, or was it the other way around? I don't know what I am, Lith replied. His blue eye remained open for a few seconds before closing shut. You got abandoned, huh? Is that why you have the hots for human women? What? Lith snarled. A puff of black smoke came out from his mouth. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Morok raised his hands in a sign of apology. My mom kicked out both me and my old man when she discovered the truth. I've got mommy issues too. Why do you think I became a ranger? For fun, Lith replied. Nailed it in one. Emperor beasts are so boring, always blabbering about duty and balance. In the army, I get to kill stuff, see stuff, date hotties, and the best part is that I get paid for it. By the way, are your eyes for decoration or what? They should be pretty powerful if you descend from a Baler and you have 7 of them. Odd, even us tyrants develop 6 tops. I am still stuck at 4, sadly. I can only see how people will die, if they do, in the immediate future. Nothing else. Lith said. 7 worthless eyes? That's harsh, brother. Maybe rather than from a Baler, you descend from a peeping dragon. Morok gave Lith a wink. Whatever. We need to find Floria and get out of this place. The longer we remain here, the higher the risk of more golems finding us. Dating so many women at once is not cool. Also, she's not that cute. We can find much better girls outside and... First, she's just my friend. Lith was seconds away from strangling the tyrant, and his face was a few millimeters from Morok's. Second, I don't know how to operate dimensional runes. Without her, we're stuck in here. Is that clear? Each word was a snarl, accompanied by a puff of smoke. You need to literally chill, brother. Lith's scales had turned red hot from his anger. You definitely have dragon blood. The brimstone breath is a killer. Mint. Morok offered him a dew-fresh leaf from his dimensional amulet, which turned into ashes the moment Lith touched it. Can you find the girls with your sense of smell? Lith asked while scanning their surroundings with life vision, finding several mana signatures, but no life form. Morok sniffed the air like a hound before shaking his head. All the spells cast during the fight have destroyed any trace I could find. Plus, the fact that they likely used dimensional magic doesn't help. I think we should work on the assumption that they've been captured. Humans have no chances against golems. After checking on Professor Neschel, Lith was forced to admit that the tyrant was probably right. Bits of the professor's corpse were mixed with the golem's remains. Neshel had detonated all of her magical items to bring her enemy down with her. Only a suicide attack of that magnitude was enough to destroy constructs. With their arrays sealing dimensional magic and uncanny bodies, there was nothing that Floria could do against them. When I get out of here, I must warn Freya. Dimensional mages like her are basically powerless against constructs. Lith thought. He told Morok about the dying words of the two humans grafted to the golems he had killed, hoping that the tyrant's eyes could help him to find his target. So you don't just see people dying, you also somehow commune with them. Seriously, who the fuck were your parents? Even though they were alone, they had both reverted to their human form to keep the element of surprise. Focus, damn it. Can you find something like the mana reactor or the so-called green array? The former we have to find and destroy, the latter we have to avoid. Lith asked. I can only sense great amounts of mana belonging to the elements associated with my four eyes. Morok said while moving around the corridor. The red, yellow, black, and orange eyes on his body moved independently, searching for energy traces. Something like what you just described should be visible from a distance, yet I can't find anything. Either it's too far from here, or it's cloaked. Both mana sense and life vision revealed nothing but the usual set of locks and arrays on the nearby doors, making Lith grit his teeth. Fine, let's backtrack our steps. If Floria or Quilla manage to escape, they'll be waiting for us. If we don't find them, we have to assume the worst and destroy the mana rector. Lith checked on Solas's condition before moving. She was using her own invigoration to recover, but she had yet to return to her full strength. Lith quickly opened a small warp steps, leading to the farthest point to the camp he had access to, closing it the moment the noxious gas started to seep through the dimensional window. I tried that too, otherwise I wouldn't have come back for you. Morok sighed. Without one of the royal forge masters, we're as good as dead. Professor Gaku reached the warehouse in a matter of minutes. The problem was that she had no idea how to safely open its door. Stay back. We've already thrown caution to the wind. There's no point in using finesse. After her chant was over, a pillar of black flames struck one of the warehouse's side walls. Darkness lowered the metal's melting point while the fire was just fire. A hole the size of a door slowly opened and the pillar made its way inside the room, destroying the crates and their content until Gaku was able to see in front of herself. Her actions triggered several alarms, but she didn't care. The soldier assumed a defensive formation around her while Gaku cooled the wall and scanned the arrays inside the room. It was then that 3 flesh golems appeared from as many warp steps, surrounding them from every side. They blocked fire, ice, and darkness magic before unleashing their thunderbolts against the floor, hitting all their prey at once. The soldiers weren't aware of that trick and Gaku had never bothered warning them. She had already fought the golems, so she knew that the soldiers were only good to buy her time. 5 soldiers and only 3 constructs. I can still escape while they capture them again. She smiled while using the disarray spell to deactivate the only dangerous magical formation in the room. Chapter 705. Gaku dashed inside, using her magical protections to tank several small air blades and ice spikes. The room had several dimensional runes which she recognized. They were the names of ancient ODI cities. Some of them were too far from Kulla to be affected by the poison tainting its surroundings. Gaku struck with her Royal Forge Master wand at the dimensional rune associated with the modern city of Other. The gate opened, revealing a stone tunnel devoid of danger. Gaku jumped towards her freedom, only for a stone hand to hit her on the head and made her lose consciousness. She had been the construct's priority from the beginning. Only after their precious slave had been apprehended did the ODI order the golems to collect the soldiers. Lith and Morok went back to the elevator and even to the living quarters, finding no trace of their missing companions. After returning to the research labs, Lith put the list of ODI words the professors had shared with the rest of the expedition members inside Solaspedia. He hoped that it would help him to make head or tails of at least a couple of signs. Unfortunately, they turned out to be useless. The ODI language was too complex, and the words at his disposal were too few to allow Lith to figure out the meaning of the writings along the corridors. When they finished exploring the lab, they found another door, probably leading to a lower floor. We should go down. The woman told me to search the basement, and this place doesn't fit the bill. Lith said, Agreed, but I don't like the idea very much. Morok shape-shifted from time to time to look for clues. His mystical senses had a greater range than Litha's and Solas's, but they didn't provide much information about the nature of the threat at hand. There's something big and really powerful down there, and for some reason, it's visible to all my 4 eyes. Why is that bad? Lith asked. I'm no awakened, so I can't see world energy, life force, or any of that stuff. I can only spot elemental mana. What I can see, even from up here, is some kind of energy pillar as big as a hill and is composed of all the 4 elements at my disposal. Lith tried using life vision, but the pillar was too far for him. He couldn't see past the arrays sealing the door in front of them. Solas's mana sense was blinded by the amount of magical equipment surrounding them instead. Lith closed in on the door, activating invigoration to study and neutralize its lock. He had to hold back a laugh when he recognized the nightmare safe. It was the same device the ODI had used to lock the secret documents in the office of Kolia's commanding officer. We're lucky. It seems that at the time this kind of protection was considered to be the best magical seal available, while it's actually the easiest to crack if you know what you're doing. Lith said while reading the array containing the password. Hey, that wasn't an array-revealing spell. You're an awakened. Morok had seen his own father using such abilities so often that he immediately recognized invigoration. Does it change anything? Lith asked, opening the door while Morok took note of the password. No, but that's an amazing piece of news. Are you willing to awake me? The tyrant knew that with that kind of power, very few beings could pose a threat to his life. Alas, golems would still be among them. Depends. Are you willing to swear me obedience for 100 years? Lith replied. Absolutely not. Then you have your answer. If I have to put my life on the line for you, you have to be damn worth the risk. So far you're just a pain in my ass. Lith opened the door, scanning his surroundings. The coast was clear, but they had to move fast, to not give the constructs the time to pinpoint their position. What if I save your girlfriend? Morok said while they were darting along the stairs. She's not my girlfriend, and a human doesn't live as much as we do. It was Litha's biggest gripe with every one of his relationships. Even with a crippled life force, he was likely to outlive most of his loved ones. It was worth a shot. Morok grumbled. Forcing someone to awaken another person was a waste of time. All Lith had to do was either to let the awakening fail or report Morok to the council. Both events would lead the tyrant to a premature death. To make matters worse, Morok had seen his fellow ranger fight, and Lith was a force to be reckoned with. The idea of having a semi-immortal enemy of that caliber on his tail forever was simply appalling. The moment they reached the bottom of the staircase, Lith could catch a glimpse of the pillar Morok was talking about. Yet it was still too far to take a proper look at it, making it necessary for them to find a way to the lower levels. Whatever was on their current floor, it was nothing useful. After waiting for a bit in front of the elevator, Floria and Quilla had been forced to warp away because of the flesh golems looking for them. The more time passed, the more they had to assume the worst. Lith might have been captured or killed. Also, without a warden, they were stuck with just Floria's Forge Master skills, which greatly limited both their options and escape chances. The 2 young mages were growing more desperate by the minute. Floria even checked with warp steps the furthest point in Morok's pathway to Kulla she could remember, but even that was filled with black smoke. The various underground tunnels had to be connected or at least share their airways. We can either get ourselves captured on purpose or take our chances and open random doors. Floria said. They were getting tired, constantly changing their position without rest drained their mana. If we get captured, we can rescue the professors and have them help us. The problem is, what if the golems stun us? Remember that they know I can deactivate them if they touch me. Once again, Quilla cursed her own helplessness. If only Uriel was here, he would know what to do. She thought. Don't worry, I've a plan. It's very risky, but it can bring us behind the enemy lines and get rid of a flesh golem at the same time. Floria said, taking deep breaths to calm herself down. What? Why didn't you propose this earlier? Professor Neschel has died, and maybe even Lith. You could have saved them both. Quilla started to sob. Another warden had died, and yet she was still alive. She wasn't actually angry with Floria. Quilla was just trying to shut up the voice in her head telling her that she was bad luck. First Uriel, now Lith. Everyone she loved died because of her. The fear of losing Floria, made Quilla feel like her existence was cursed. Because it's a desperate plan. Earlier, with Lith and Neshel, we still had a chance of escaping on our own. If it fails, we'll end up in the ODI's hands. Floria hugged her sister, trying to comfort Quilla. Since both our lives are at risk, I can't make this decision on my own. Are you with me? Quilla stopped crying and nodded. Floria explained her plan to Quilla, making her yelp more than once. A few minutes later, they were in front of a locked door. They had hoped that a golem would find them, but since that didn't happen, they had to lure one. Chapter 706. Floria used one of Orion's spells, which revealed the relays of the keycard lock mechanism and allowed her to open it simply by sending a mana pulse to the right spot. She opened the door and ran into hiding. They had chosen a place at the end of a corridor, so that there was only one way in and one way out, requiring just a single golem to trap them. As Floria had predicted, the construct warped at the end of the hallway to block the only escape route available. The golem was surprised seeing that there was no human in front of itself, nor its sensors could pick up any energy signature. Yet the door was open. Floria and Quilla were on the opposite end of the corridor, waiting for the warping array to open and blink through it. Once on the other side, Floria was surprised to discover that not only did the surveillance devices have already been destroyed, but also the cells were all empty except for the one holding the assistants. The golem reported its failure and stepped back inside the gate, getting struck by both sisters with their respective clean slate. The Tier 4 Forge Master spell required physical contact and had no permanent effect on something as complex as a construct. Yet it could temporarily stop its functions. 2 clean slate at once were enough to turn the golem's power core off for a split second, which made the dimensional corridor collapse. The construct was only halfway through, so it got cleaved in half along with its power core. Floria's plan had been a complete success. Please, don't abandon us here as the professors did. The assistants started sobbing the moment their jailer was gone. I don't have much time, so I need you to be honest with me. Which one of you is a warden? They all started to yell me, making Floria curse. We should take with us both Asura and Anma, Quilla said while opening their locks with clean slate. They are the assistants of Neshel and Elkas. I spoke with them more than once, so I know that they are respectively a warden and a linguist. Anma was actually an alchemist, but that information was useless in their situation. The 2 remaining assistants started to scream so hard that Floria had to hush them. Is this how Lith felt during Balkir's attack? Floria thought, knowing that you can't save everyone, and that even bringing one more person along might doom us all. Lith had never felt anything like that. He had just pretended so to not be burdened by people he didn't care about, but Floria had no way to know it. She regretted leaving 2 innocents to a fate worse than death, but at the same time, she couldn't kill them in cold blood. Great thinking, Quilla, we must. Her words were interrupted by another warp appearing. She and Quilla had expected that the destruction of a golem might alert the others, so they had a contingency plan for that. What they didn't have a plan for was the man accompanying the construct. Tired of losing their precious flesh golems, Jaira had decided to personally take care of the latest disturbance. His eyes lit up with joy when he saw the 2 young women. /U003C. Well. Finally our luck it's turning. /U003E. His smile creeped all those presents out. They had seen multiple ODI pictures, but even that wasn't enough to prepare them to meet the real deal. Just like all his colleagues, Jaira was the embodiment of perfection, but only according to ODI standards. He was 1.70 meters, 5 feet 7 inches, tall, with long purple hair and blue translucent skin. It allowed them to see every single twitch of his muscles and organs since he was almost naked, wearing only a loincloth to cover his genitals. His body was comprised only of muscles, and what was visible of his face could have been considered handsome, if it didn't appear completely unnatural. He looked more like a statue come to life rather than a living being. Floria attacked the ODI with her estoc the moment he appeared. She had no idea what he was capable of, but she had to stop him from casting spells. Jaira grabbed her blade with just 3 of his fingers. With a wave of his hand, the golem disappeared inside the warp, while a green array formed around Jaira. Floria gasped, recognizing by its color the spell that the dying flesh golems had warned Lith against, so she promptly unleashed the spells stored in her rings. Gyra just pointed his forefinger, generating a ray of light that pierced through Floria's spells and chest, leaving a hole the size of a golf ball. His finger flashed one more time, striking Quilla down before she could do anything. He then chained them where once the professors had been, letting the red chain's properties to heal and restore their bodies before the procedure. /U003C. Finally, we have our interpreter and enough bodies for our most useful members. We only need to retrieve the boy to start our plan. The old coots and the non-humans can die. We have no use for them. /U003E. The other ODI welcomed his proposition with an applause. After being prisoners inside their own home for so long, they could finally see a way out. Lith and Morok walked through the door and ran along the corridor to avoid falling in another ambush. Lith kept revealing and destroying the surveillance devices along their path until they reached a large, circular room from which branched several corridors, each one with an arrow-shaped tag to identify their destination. Lith looked at the sign pointing from the direction they had arrived and noted down the ODI word for stairs. Then, he searched the remaining tags for another one containing the same characters that was supposed to lead them further down. Yet he stopped halfway for two reasons. The first was that he recognized the character for meat shields. It was identical to the one he had found with Floria in the tunnels departing from Kulla. The second reason was that his revealing spell couldn't find working surveillance devices in the room, nor in the corridor leading to the magical beast breeding center. One of ours went this way. Lith pointed with his finger. It was Yandra, her assistant, and Elka's. Morok said after sniffing the air. That's not all. The soldiers in Gaku went that way. He was pointing at the warehouse, but Lith didn't recognize the character, and his spell confirmed that the surveillance devices in that corridor were still operational. All the professors seemed to have managed to escape. How long ago did they pass from here? Lith asked. Not much. A few minutes tops. Morok replied. If we make haste, we might be able to catch up with her. After all, she had to slow down to clear her path, whereas we can just follow into her footsteps. His idea was interesting, but not for Lith. If they actually found Yandra, Morok wouldn't need Floria anymore to escape, nor could Lith say them anything to stop them from leaving him alone in that nightmare. Yet he nodded and used life vision to scan the area ahead. If he found Yandra and a dimensional rune leading to safety, he would know where to warp to as soon as he rescued his friends. Also, if he managed to convince Yandra to teach him how to operate a dimensional rune, their escape would proceed even smoother. Chapter 707. The metal corridor turned out to be very long. It branched several times because each kind of magical beast had its own breeding facility. Also, they were further split according to what they were destined to become. The elite meat shields were breed in a department, while the fuel for the mana reactor was breed in another. To find the right path, Lith just had to check at each intersection where the cameras had been deactivated and where they were still active. Unbeknownst to them, they were following Yandra's group toward the tech's breeding facility. Good gods, Lith said when life vision perceived 3 familiar life signatures, and his array detecting spell revealed 5 elemental blocking arrays to him, hidden but ready to be activated at any moment. It's anyone there? Lith asked, even though he already knew the answer. We followed your trail. Thank the gods, young spirit. It's so nice to see you. We were just biding our time and fearing for the worst. Yandra came from around the corner, hugging Lith while sighing in relief. She looked terrible. They had been separated barely half an hour ago, yet she looked like someone who didn't have a good night's rest in days. She was covered in sweat, panting heavily with every word. Yandra seemed to have suddenly got older, to the point that she was even unable to stand upright properly. She was leaning against Lith rather than just hugging him. What happened to you? Are your injuries so severe? Lith asked while performing invigoration on her. Her body was fine, but she was running on fumes. Both her mana and stamina were almost depleted. No injuries, but you see, I've been thinking ahead. Her crafty smile and hunched posture made her resemble Nana so much that it almost hurt. I've disabled the surveillance devices of all the corridors from the last junction so that the ODI don't know where exactly we are. Lith nodded. He had found them with life vision and had yelled to pretend to have fallen for her deception. Yet the moment I open a door, everything will be for naught. So I spent all of my energies to cast the necessary arrays to turn any golem that tries to block us into scraps. Lith found several flaws in her plan. First, if more than one golem came, they would be doomed. If they activated the arrays while only one construct was inside its area of effect, the second would need but a handful of seconds to make a temporary array collapse. If they waited for the second construct to enter the arrays, by that time the first golem might as well already captured them all. Last, but not least, even if they somehow managed to trap several golems at once, all the ODI had to do was to unleash the magical beasts to finish them off. The arrays would seal their spells as well, making it impossible for humans to stand their ground against magical beasts. This plan is idiotic. Yandra must be beyond desperate. Lith thought. My problem is that if they send more than one golem, we're screwed. Yandra continued. Don't get me started on how bad things would get if instead of inside the corridor, the ODI make the constructs warp inside the room, whereas not covered by my array's area of effect. We can't deal with golems, magical beasts, and the arrays inside the room at the same time. At least not by ourselves. Or not. Lith corrected himself, listening to Yandra's well-thought reasoning. Then what's the meaning of all this? Lith asked. The original plan was for me to rest and recover enough strength to take care of the defensive arrays while Elkas dealt with the magical beasts. If we managed to move fast enough, we might reach a dimensional rune and escape. The elemental blocking arrays are a last-ditch effort to cover our retreat in the case the golems arrive before we find the rune. I planned on using them more defensively than offensively. But now that the two of you are with us, things will go much smoother. None of us can fight hand-to-hand, but you can. Your presence at least has the time we need to find and activate the rune. Yandra said, keep resting. In such a debilitated state, you'd slow us too much. Lith forced her to sit down and handed her some food. Then, he explained what had happened since the group had been split. If they have captured your friends, they must be in the prison, locked by those terrible red chains. Yandra said, explaining to him the artifact's properties. Is the prison nearby, and can you warp me there? Lith asked. Yes to both, but please, listen to me first. According to Raynor, there is always a golem standing guard to the prisoners, so if you go there, you'll trigger the alarm and give away our position. Are you asking me to abandon them? Like you abandoned Raynor? Lith sneered. No, what I'm asking you to do is to play it smart. Yandra shook her head. Let's say you find and save them. What then? You would still be trapped here with no way out. Worst case scenario, you'll ruin my plan. Here is my idea. Stay here and help us clear the path. If we succeed, all you need to do is to warp to the prison, rescue them with our help, warp back here, and get out. You might even not need to fight. Stalling a golem is much easier than destroying it. Your plan is good, but what if after we find the rune you get away and leave me behind? Why should you risk everything for me when freedom is just a step away? What if the ODI or their golems damage the rune? You would reap all the benefits of my work, and I would be stuck here. Lith knew that no one would sacrifice so much for a stranger. If their roles were reversed and Yandra wanted his help to save Raynor, he wouldn't think twice leaving her behind. He's right, you know. I'm not staying here a second longer than necessary. Don't count on me for your rescue mission. Unless, of course. Morok winked at Lith with a greedy smile on his face. Becoming an awakened was a nice incentive. Neither am I. I'm sorry, kid, but someone has to alert the kingdom. This is too big for any of us. Only an army of well-prepared spell breakers can destroy this place. Anything but running is just suicide. Elkas tried to sound as if he was more worried about the kingdom than for his own life, but failed miserably. Do you see what I mean? Just point me to the prison, and I'll do the rest. I'll not mess with your plan, but I won't help you either. Lith stood up, ready to leave. There's only one thing I need to know. Can you teach me how to activate a dimensional rune? Yandra was conflicted by the choice at hand. She had really hoped that they could escape together, but without Ranger Eerie and Elkas, there was not much she could do. Raynor kept looking at her like a lost puppy, begging her to bring him home. Chapter 708. Seriously, I can't believe we've come to this point. Yandra thought. Even if I could actually make a difference, I would never trust Elkas or Eerie with Raynor. They both strike me like someone who always looks out for number one. Hence I can't stay here and hope that they will help him out of the goodness of their hearts, and why I can only trust them until the dimensional gate will be opened. After that, I'll be on my own. I can't be like these idiots. I must think about the bigger picture. What if we get interrupted and we have to run away? What if something happens to me? Everyone else would be doomed. She took a deep breath, trying to make her mind. She was too tired to think clearly, yet she had to. After a few seconds, she decided to gamble one last time, to leave no stone unturned. I could teach you how to operate dimensional runes, but it would be pointless. Yandra replied, there are only two ways to fuel them. The first is with what their maker intended as a key. In the ODI's case, it's probably a mana crystal carved with a particular shape. The second way is to use a Royal Forgemaster's wand to directly activate the rune with your mana. Great. So you're blackmailing me. Either I come with you or I risk getting stuck here forever. Lith didn't like ultimatums, yet he had his back against the wall. Both choices sucked. To stay behind meant to risk everything for someone who might already be dead, but leaving was even worse. Floria was the first person who had ever accepted him for who he was, and Quilla was almost like a sister to him. She had come to that horrible place because of him, to find a way to prolong his life. More than everything, he couldn't keep living with the thought to have given up on two of the people who mattered the most for him. When Lith had been reborn, surrounded by the love of his family, he had sworn that nothing and no one would have ever been taken away from him again. Yet it was exactly what was likely to happen. No blackmailing. I'm offering you my help. Help us to reach the dimensional rune. Give Ranger Eerie whatever he wants from you, and I'll help you save your friends. Yandra said, while looking him straight into his eyes. If it's just the two of us, your plan would be suicidal. But with Eerie's help, it's like having the whole team. She sneered at Elkas and Raynor. Their battle prowess was bordering on insignificance. Fine. Lith didn't like the deal much, but it was the best compromise he could get. That way, no matter if Floria was alive or not, he would still have a way out. His infant conscience and his selfishness had stopped quarreling, giving him time to think. It's not that bad of a deal, he thought. If Yandra's plan succeeds, their help will make saving Floria and Quilla much easier. If it fails, well, my deal with Morok will be the least of my worries. You heard the lady. Are you in? Lith asked. For real? Do you give me your word that this is not a trick? Morok had never thought that Lith would have actually accepted. His earlier offer was barely a joke, to spread salt on Lith's wounds. You have my word. A life for a life. Lith extended his hand, and Morok promptly shook it. Well, as we brothers used to say, if before you had my curiosity, now you have my undivided erection. Don't you mean attention? Raynor asked. I know exactly what I mean, kid. Good. While we wait that I recover some of my strength, let me teach you how to use a Royal Forgemaster's wand. Yandra handed Lith her silver wand, making Raynor's jaw almost fall to the ground. Master Yandra, why? He asked. Because if we fail and something happens to me, everyone would be stranded here. We need a contingency plan. She replied. The moment Lith had it in his hands, he used invigoration to understand the wand's nature. Much to his surprise, it didn't have a pseudo-core, nor it was actually made out of silver. The external layer of precious metal was just a focus for a small mana crystal. Both of them were covered in silver-colored runes Lith had never seen before. Unfortunately, Yandra demanded his attention before he could study it properly. The wand is basically a filter. It purifies your mana from its energy signature, allowing it to be universally accepted by all kinds of devices as if you are a giant mana crystal. Also, the lack of energy signature allows your mana to interact with most artifacts without triggering their defensive systems. Hence why we could safely examine Kulla's various locks and seals. It has many other properties, but that would be beyond the scope of our lesson. Yandra then taught him the spell to activate the dimensional runes, and once she was certain that Lith had learned it properly, she gave the wand to Raynor and asked him to perform the spell as well. That way, no matter who survived, her apprentice would be useful, and hence the others would be more careful about his well-being. The spell itself was simple, but it required both a high amount of mana and a highly developed mana control, the two trademarks talents of a Forge Master. Lith had learned the spell so fast that Raynor lived it as a competition, doing his best to not let down his beloved mentor. While Yandra repeated her instructions to her pupil, Lith asked Professor Elkas to translate for him all the signs they had found along the way. Elkas was happy to help. His talents as both a linguist and an alchemist weren't very useful in their predicament. Just like Quilla, he was deeply regretting not to have practiced an offensive specialization. He had spent his whole life holed up in his academy, letting his love for the past civilizations made him forget about the dangers of the present. Thanks to him, Lith was able to enrich his ODI vocabulary and even find the way leading to the lower floors. I wonder if Gaka managed to escape. If yes, the warehouse might be worth checking. I'll know more after visiting the detention facility. I need a contingency plan in case the dimensional rune of the meat factory gets destroyed. Lith thought. Yandra hadn't taught him how to repair runes, and he suspected that it was not only because the task required special ingredients, but also to ensure Rainer's survival. If the youth already knew the restoration spell, then Lith would be forced to take care of him. Such a shrewd woman. Lith thought. If she was a true mage, I would immediately accept her offer of apprenticeship. With her deep knowledge about almost all magical specializations and her title of Royal Forge Master, Yandra's help would save me decades of research. Lith turned to look at Morok, yet his glare only found a sleeping ranger. He would have gladly followed the tyrant's example, but time was a luxury he couldn't afford. While Yandra rested and meditated, he squeezed all the knowledge he could from Elkas. We have to move now, Yandra said less than half an hour later. Without mana crystals to fuel them, my arrays are going to disappear in a while, but we can't place mana crystal without making our trap lose the element of surprise. Chapter 709. Yandra had stopped wheezing, but she was still far from being strong enough to fight. Lith gave her an alchemical flask that Solus had prepared for him, which contained all the necessary nutrients for a speedy recovery after being injured. Thanks for the offer, but I already took a tonic. One more would do nothing but drain my energy. Yandra politely refused. This is no tonic. It will complement the effects of the potion you already took. Also, I'm going to give you a bit of life force. I can't afford to lose you. Lith insisted. Yandra gulped down the potion. It had a really weird taste, as if someone had blended together grape juice, steak, and vegetables. The problem with tonics was that even though they enhanced the metabolism, they still required food to work. Yandra had eaten, but she had yet to digest the food, whereas Solus's concoction could be instantly assimilated. Lith used invigoration to give her a bit of life, force, and mana back. Not enough to arouse her suspicions, but enough to clear her head. This thing tastes like shit, but I feel much better, Yandra said, appreciating the full effects of both Solus's potion and invigoration. Let's move. She quickly cast an array detection spells, making the ODI's magical formations become visible. With another spell, she made all the protections crumble, leaving only the card reader lock in place. Once I open the door, I need to stay behind to check the corridor and activate the elemental blocking arrays in case one or more golems appear. Yandra said, Lith, Morok, you clear the room and call me as soon as you're done. Rainer, Elkas, you two stay between the rangers and I. Support us at best of your possibilities. Ready? Go. A flick of her wand made the light above the card reader turn green, releasing the lock. Lith entered the room and used one of his personal spells. It revealed that the compound shared the same protections that he and Floria had found in the Tex breeding ground. There was a fire-based, a darkness-based, and an air-based magical formation. The room was 20 meters long and 10 meters wide. Along the walls, there was a long line of cylindrical tanks holding adult Tex in what looked like suspended animation. There were at least 40 magical beasts, each one as big as a closet. He, Morok, and Elkas took down one array each, while Rainer neutralized the security cameras. They were all casting from behind a door to keep both their numbers and identity a secret. Lith cursed when he saw with life vision that several gates were about to open inside the room, whereas the corridor where Yandra had placed her arrays was empty. Fuck. How many of those accursed golems they had prepared, and why didn't they use them in the war? Lith received all the answers he needed when he saw that the creatures stepping out of the warping arrays were no golems. A small army of thorns was filling the room while the tanks holding the Tex were being opened. There's too many of them, Morok said, based on his estimate. Even if he went all out as a tyrant and burned his cover as a human, it would still take them too long to clean the room. On top of that, they would be too tired to hold their ground in the case a flesh golem appeared. I got this, Elkas said, glad to be useful for once. The professor messed on purpose with his disarray spell, so that instead of dissipating the magical protection, he sent it haywire along with the others. Elkas closed the heavy metal door just a second before the resulting combined explosion made the wall tremble. "Elkas, you idiot," Yandra said. "You've probably alerted the entire base. What if you destroyed the rune? There's a limit to the damage I can repair." "Better than being butchered," he replied. "Or do you expect us to take down dozens of creatures in just a handful of seconds?" Morok opened the door again, discovering that despite the fact that most of the creatures had been heavily injured or maimed, most of the techs were alive, and so were the thorns. "There's one thing I have to try," Lith said, unleashing his spell, Death Zone. A huge cloud composed of darkness magic invaded the room, killing the techs as if they were a bunch of flies. "Stop that spell," Morok cursed. Instead of taking damage from Death Zone, the thorns were getting bigger and stronger by the second. "Trust me." Lith kept the spell active until all the wounds the thorns had sustained from the detonation of the arrays were completely healed. "You idiot. You made them stronger." In Fyro, Morok's human eyes turned red as his fire eye charged his short words, making them emit a deadly heat wave. Contrary to his expectations, instead of just pushing the thorns back, the ray burned the first row of creatures to a crisp, stopping only when the thorns managed to combine their efforts to conjure a protective wall of darkness. The fuck? Morok couldn't believe his own many eyes. After fighting Urtu, Lith had learned that some creatures were able to absorb darkness magic and use it to heal themselves. During the battle in front of the elevator, he had noticed how the thorns weren't affected by the darkness element, so Lith had used their ability to his own advantage. To heal wounds that severe and grow their bodies, the thorns needed nourishment. Sure, they were now bigger and healthier, but also exhausted, making them an easy prey. The thorns started to feed upon each other, reducing their numbers and helping Litha's group to clear the field even faster. A new set of gates opened, letting an army of Koas swarm the room. "There's no end to them. Yandra, you need to find the goddamn rune and fast." Elkas used his alchemical tools to mow the magical beasts down while still being able to speak and, if necessary, prepare more spells. Yandra ran inside the room, giving a little red mana crystal to Raynor. "You keep guard in my place. Do not activate the arrays unless all the golems step into them. Don't hesitate to run if you think you can't handle the situation." Yandra blinked near the door leading to the next room, past the enemy lines. Lith followed her lead, to provide her cover while she cleared the path. He engaged the Koas physically, triggering their bloodlust so that they would only focus on him. The Koas' hard scales made blades useless, so both he and Morok employed blunt weapons to damage their internal organs. To resist the deep sea pressure, Koas had sturdy and compact bodies, yet their organs were packed so tight that the shockwave of each hit easily propagated through them. Unfortunately, living or dying didn't matter to the Koas. They attacked the Rangers in waves, simply stepping over their fallen comrades. Their lightning-enhanced claws managed to pierce even the skinwalker armor, sending shocks through Litha's body that made him almost spasm more than once. The Koas had no qualms in using lightning bolts even against their own, using the magical beasts in front as a cover for their spells. A Koa was nothing compared to Lith, but there seemed to be no end to their numbers, and his body continued to sustain wounds. To add insult to his many injuries, Lith had to prevent the Koas from getting past him. If even one of them disturbed Yandra's work, she would have been forced to start again from scratch. Chapter 710. Lith stood in front of Yandra, unleashing all the spells contained in his rings to buy himself a moment of respite. The living wall of Koas in front of him fell to a volley of wind blades while a sphere of darkness magic slowed the following waves of creatures, making them stumble. On the other hand of the room, Morok wasn't faring much better. Even with the physical strength of an emperor beast and the power of his eyes, he was slowly getting pushed back. To make matters worse, the fallen thorns were regrowing their bodies by feasting on the corpses of their fallen enemies. Green tentacles imbued with darkness energy wrapped around his legs and sapped his strength. He cut them down as fast as he could, but they would release toxic spores laced with darkness magic that made it hard for him to breathe. What a deadly combination, Morok thought. Techs are like heavy infantry, Koas are fast and armored like cavalry units, while thorns are almost immortal. They just need to feed on fallen enemies or allies to rebuild themselves, or even increase their numbers. We're lucky that they are completely unable to cooperate, or we would be already dead. Just like Ranger Erie had assessed, the 3 combined magical beasts were a threat on par with the flesh golems. Unfortunately, the ODI experiments had made them mad and incapable of understanding even the simplest order. When they had tried to use slave items on them, they had no effects. The mass-produced magical beasts would attack anything but their master, even their own kin. Old man, don't you have an herbicide? Something to kill them all in a fell swoop. He asked to Elkas while the spore density had become so high that both he and the Koas were suffocating. I do, but it would kill you in the process. Also, I've no guarantee that it wouldn't reach the other end of the corridor and kill Yandra as well. The professor replied. To him, Lith and Morok were expandable, but without Yandra, he was screwed. Among the other things, Morok was a battle mage, but between the nature of his opponents and of the location of the battle, he had no way to put his specialization to use. There was no earth. All the creatures were immune to lightning. Darkness would strengthen the thorns and offer him little protection, and fire might harm his allies. Lith had the same problem and no solution as well. I'm done. Blinken sighed. Yandra yelled while opening the room. Are you crazy? Morok replied. Aren't supposed to be arrays in there as well? What stops our friends to just warp there and follow us? Excellent point. Lith used spirit magic to grab a few Koas and throw them inside the next room before closing the door. A series of booms and sizzles told them that the place was indeed protected. Damn runts, you had one job. Yandra started to chant, while Lith tried all the spells he had at the ready, hoping to turn the tables. A frozen wave got rid of the spores in the air, but no creature seemed to be affected. A barrage of jets of fire almost made the air unbreathable and hurt the nearest thorns, but they simply used the carpet of corpses on the ground to smother the flames and rejuvenate themselves. He would have loved to use origin flames, but in such a confined space they would hurt him as well. He erected a wall of wind, strengthening it with spirit magic to buy Yandra a few seconds, yet it lasted only one. The pressure that the Koa exerted was too great. The creatures were uncaring of their death or of that of their companions. They were so many and their scales so hard that even wind blades would cut only one of them before losing their edge. Yandra finished her chant, conjuring for walls made of ice that sealed the creatures away while a pillar of flames materialized in the middle of the room. Fire and ice? This doesn't make sense unless... Just as Lith had predicted, the ice walls couldn't stop water creatures like the Koas for long. With their sheer strength and numbers, it took them a little more than a second to crack the half a meter, 1.7 feet, thick walls. In the following seconds, the cracks grew until they covered the entirety of Yandra's spell. Then, just as fast as they had appeared, the fissures started to close. The fire pillar was almost gone, and so was the air inside the ice walls. The mass of bodies blocked the gates, and even the little oxygen that managed to enter wasn't enough to sustain so many creatures. Once Yandra was certain that her spell would hold, she turned around and started to take the arrays in the next room down with the help of the rangers. This took us way longer than I predicted, Yandra said while spreading in the air silvery strands of mana from her wand to look for dimensional runes. Lith took down the cameras, but unless the ODI were incredibly stupid or they were against an automated defense, their goal was obvious. Without waiting for Elkas, she started to activate all the runes she managed to find. Some, like the one Floria had triggered, were too close to Kulla and lead to tunnels filled with poison. When she finally found one leading to a safe area, she said, "Tell Elkas and Raynor to join us. We'll stay behind, but they can leave." Lith didn't like their situation at all. He had hoped to not have to explore 2 rooms, nor to face a whole army of creatures. Damn it. If I knew it would have been so difficult, I could have gotten a much better deal. What really worries me, though, is that no more gates have been opened. Whoever our enemy is, they know our position and goal. We're so weakened that another wave of frenzied beasts would be enough to kill us. Lith was using invigoration. His paranoia told him that everything was going too smoothly to be true. Lith left Yandra and Morok to their work. The room was so full of arrays that it would take a while to neutralize them all and walk safely through the gate. He called for his companions, but no answer came. He activated life vision, noticing that there was no energy signature. Only the black wind of death was emanated by something in the proximity of the door, where Elka's was supposed to be. Lith turned around to check the room, and the next. Morok and Yandra were safe, and the ODI's gates had been closed. Lith opened the door, to be sure about what to tell Yandra, and found Elka's corpse. It had 2 holes the size of a golf ball, one in the middle of his eyes, and the other in his chest. Whatever had killed him had also struck at the metal walls with such strength that it had left molten indentations as big as Lith's head. There was no trace of Raynor. The red mana crystal that Yandra had given him to activate the arrays was lying on the floor, still ready to be used. Whoever was responsible for it, they had been as quick as silent, otherwise Lith or Morok would have sensed it coming. Chapter 711. Lith rushed back to the warp room while keeping life vision active. It must have happened after Yandra disposed of the magical beasts. That's why no more dimensional corridors have been opened. Our enemy must have captured Raynor while we were busy. They didn't want us meddling to be sure that they would manage to take him alive. Damn it. This means that I have no time to waste. If Floria and Quilla have been captured as well, the ODI can start the body-swapping procedure at any time. Lith was right and wrong at the same time. It hadn't been a plan, like his paranoia suggested to him. The ODI had simply exploited the opening that had been created the moment the group had split. Also, they would never start their experiments before being sure that nothing could mess with the first opportunity they had in centuries to walk Mogar again. Enemy incoming in front of you, Lith said when he saw dimensional energies gathering in front of his comrades. Yandra thought Lith meant from behind and tried to turn around, but Morok knew better and kept her still while summoning the Tier 5 Battle Mage spell, God of Water. A full armor made of ice covered his body while all the moisture in the air condensed throughout the room in spheres of water that would allow Morok to replicate the effects of all Tier 3 and 4 water magic spells he knew without the need to cast them. It was the spell that, coupled with his blue eye, had allowed him to take single-handedly down a single flesh golem with relative ease. A warp array opened, letting Jyra join his guests. He clapped his hands, mostly to compliment himself, for a job well done. /U003C. Too bad that old coots never survived being turned into flesh golems. With a brain like yours, you'd make an excellent slave. /U003E, he said as a green array formed all around him, enveloping the whole room. Jyra had watched the fight through both cameras and small dimensional gates. He had always been a huge fan of gladiator pits, and the last show he had witnessed had taken place centuries ago. /U003C. As for you, filthy beast, no matter what form you take, you can't hide from us. /U003E. Morok had no interest in listening to Jyra's ramblings and attacked the ODI the moment he appeared. He didn't care about the green array nor the warning Lith had received from the dying golems. This is going to be easy. The fucker can't even use dimensional magic. So far they have always opened warping arrays, not warp steps. Morok thought as he commanded half the water spheres to freeze his enemy, while the other half turned into icicles that darted toward Jyra. The ODI just laughed at Morok's efforts, and the green array flashed for an instant. All of Morok's attacks stopped a few centimeters away from Jyra, as an invisible force had prevented even the energy from moving further. What the fuck? Morok and Yandra said in unison. The ranger was flabbergasted. Suddenly, he couldn't feel the God of Water spell anymore, yet its effects were still visible in front of his eyes. /U003C. Nice suit of armor. I wish we were capable of such spells. /U003E. Jyra was engrossed by the dramatic changes that Silverwing's legacy had triggered in the development of new forms of magic. /U003C. Yet to be really safe, you should wear it tighter, like this. /U003E. Jyra clenched his fist, and the ice armor turned into a torturing device which trapped its wearer and stabbed him with countless small ice shards. A flick of the ODI's wrist made all the conjured icicles fly across the room, to get rid of the beast and the old woman in one fell swoop. Now I understand why the golems warned me about the green array and why Raynor failed to defend himself despite the arrays Yandra had left him. Lith thought while studying the events unfolding in front of his eyes with life vision. The moment the green array had flashed, Morok's energy signature had been replaced by Gyra's, allowing him to take control of the Tier 5 spell. Yandra had no mystical senses, but years of battle experience let her understand that conjuring a spell before having a clear idea of the opponent's abilities might do them more harm than good. She used her defensive amulet, which created an energy barrier that stopped the icicles and crushed them to bits. First weak points of all arrays, they can't be moved. Lith thought while using spirit magic to drag both of his companions outside the room without stepping inside the ODI's magical formation. /U003C, what is that? /U003E spirit magic was supposed to be invisible, yet Lith's tendrils of mana were clear as the day the moment they crossed the green array's threshold. One of the many reasons the ODI had lost the war was the Emperor Beast's revenge against them. They didn't need Silverwing's legacy to create Tier 4 or 5 spells, and just a few awakened of them could turn the tides of every battle. The green array, also called God's Will, was the solution they had found after countless experiments and sacrifices. To perfect it, many ODI had died, and because of its limitations, it couldn't be used outside Kula. Gyra was too surprised to react in time, so Lith managed to save his companions and dispel the tendril he meant to use to snap the ODI's neck before it could be used against him. "We have to run now," Lith said, unwilling to fight a losing battle. Solus, how the heck can he conjure an array that fast? I thought that only golems could do that due to their power core. Lith asked. He was confident about killing the ODI with his physical abilities alone, but he had no idea if the array had more than one ability or what to do if a flesh golem joined the fray. "There is a small bead hidden inside his ribcage," Solus replied. "That's the source of the array, yet it doesn't explain where the ODI takes the mana to fuel it. That thing combines the worst of a golem's power core and Silverwing's hexagram. Even an awakened one using invigoration would have a hard time keeping it active. It seems that Quilla's hypothesis about the mana reactor was correct. Where's Raynor?" Yandra asked. "Taken. Elkis is dead," Lith said while Morok broke free from his armor with pure brute force. He was bleeding from many cuts, some even deep, yet they couldn't afford to slow down. Yandra gritted her teeth. All of her plans, all of her hard work to protect her beloved assistant had actually doomed the youth to a fate worse than death. "There's no point in running away." Yandra abruptly stopped. "If we can't defeat a single ODI, then we'll never manage to save anyone. We can, but only if we take down the mana reactor first." Lith stopped as well, but only because Gyro was once again in front of them. He had placed the golems in strategic positions, allowing him to freely warp from one point to another, sealing off the only escape route they had. Chapter 712. Don't worry. This is exactly the kind of situation for which I devised my dampener. Yandra took the small tuning fork from her pocket, imbuing it with her mana. "Come on, you bastard. I dare you to try and rob us of our spells again." Lith would have considered it an excellent plan, if not for the fact that the enemy was likely to have endless mana. She's right, though. If all ODI have one of those things, I must find a way to neutralize it if I want to have a chance to save Floria and Quilla. We still have the advantage of numbers and Yandra's artifacts. It's worth a try, Lith thought while unleashing a final sunset. Gyra activated the God's Will array again, hijacking Lith's spell as if it was just a chore magic trick and stopping the ray of black flames in its tracks. Lith fought with all of his willpower, trying to keep his energy signature and the control over the spell. Yet just like he had feared, it wasn't a matter of will as much of mana. Gyra was simply flooding Lith's spell with his own energy. Final Sunset required a lot of mana, so there was a limit to the amount of energy Lith could employ before becoming too weak to keep fighting. Yandra's dampener absorbed a speck of Gyra's mana and analyzed its energy signature, allowing her to disrupt his control over Lith's spell. Final Sunset resumed its advance, yet Gyra seemed to be more amused rather than scared. No matter how much of his mana the dampener scattered away, the ODI just had to inject more. /U003C. Finally a true challenge that can put to the test the fruits of our endeavor. I praise your efforts. You're not bad for a bunch of hairless monkeys. /U003E Gyra said, yet no one understood his words. It's not working, We have to go before it's too late. Lith replenished his reserves with invigoration, but he knew that Yandra couldn't keep up. Fuck no. He's almost done. Ekadu. Morok reverted to his tyrant form using the black eye on his chest to produce a black pillar of energy that his weapons captured and amplified. He didn't care for his secrete so much as for his survival. Morok darted forward, getting past Yandra and into the array. His Emperor Beast's body was boosted by fusion magic, allowing him to move as fast as a shooting arrow. He had learned his lesson. No more spells, only physical attacks. Meanwhile, Yandra was sweating bullets. Even though Lith had given her a bit of energy, she didn't have much mana from the start. Disabling the arrays, unlocking the doors, and using the Tier 5 Magic Knight spell Empty Prison had only made things worse. She needed sheer willpower just to keep standing, so when Yandra saw Morok's real body, she didn't even flinch. One small mistake and Lith's spell would kill them both. The tyrant's red eye showered Gyra with flames, but countless ice crystals intercepted and smothered them into nothingness. Thanks to the mana reactor, Gyra could empower fist magic to the point of making its effects as powerful as Tier 3 magic. In such a state, he was even superior to an awakened. First magic required barely a thought and willpower to be shaped. It had no casting time. The cold wave slowed Morok enough that Gyra had the time to lift his right forefinger before the tyrant could hit him. It emitted such a condensed stream of fire that it was almost solid. Morok managed to raise his blades at the last second, deflecting the energy beam aimed at his head. The impact was so strong that it pushed the ranger back and bent his blades. Even though they were made of orichalcum, without the darkness energy coursing through them, they would have been pierced along with their master. Morok cursed, sheathing and unsheathing his weapons to repair the damage they had sustained. Gyra smiled, amazed by the many marvels that were waiting for the ODI race on Mogur's surface. Everything seemed to be ripe for the taking. His forefinger flicked 3 times, emitting as many fiery beams. The first 2 were deflected by the tyrant's blades, but the third found the way to his heart, opening a sizzling hole the size of a golf ball. Morok sprawled on the floor in a pool of his own blood. His body twitched for a bit before becoming still. Yandra had barely the time to register what had just happened, putting all the mana she had left in her dampener. Lith's final sunset was their only hope, and it was now just a few centimeters from the ODI's face. Gyra gave them one of the cruelest smiles Lith had ever seen, something that usually appeared on his own face when he outsmarted an enemy. A simple wave of the ODI's hand made the Tier 5 spell turn 180 degrees, making it now aim against the 2 humans. /U003C. There's nothing better than leaving maggots like you a shred of hope. You fight so hard when you believe that you actually have a chance. Then, when I take away that hope, when your expression turns into despair, that's the moment that makes me happy to be alive. /U003E. Once again, Gyra wasn't talking to them, just to himself. Yet Yandra didn't need to understand the ODI language to realize what was going on. The tables had been turned too suddenly to be just because of her getting weaker. The enemy had played them all along, like a cat with a mouse. The energy beam almost reached her face before stopping again, in a last act of idle cruelty. /U003C. Any last words, maggot? /U003E. Yet he didn't wait for a reply, resuming the attack the moment he was done with his mockery. Realizing what was about to happen, Yandra used the last spark of mana she had left to slow the hijacked spell long enough to change its trajectory and give Lith the time he needed to retreat. Unfortunately, Lith's final sunset boosted by Gyra's mana was fast and powerful enough to strike them down almost at the same time. The spell opened a hole in her chest, cauterizing it while piercing through Yandra, before striking down Lith and engulfing him in black flames. Gyra laughed while waiting for Lith's body to stop moving, and closed in on Yandra. Her dampener had shattered when final sunset had struck it, but her Royal Forge Master wand was still intact. Gyra had no notion of dimensional items, so he searched both her and Morok, taking away everything he could find before warping away. The moment he disappeared, Lith dispelled the black flames, thanking his cunning and the ODI's ignorance about Tier 5 spells. Once Lith had understood Gyra's intentions, he had recalled his final sunset, using it to protect himself from the enemy's attack. Jireh had no idea that what he had captured with the God's Will array was just a portion of the spell, nor that the part outside the array was still under Litha's control. Between the mana-boosted Skinwalker armor and his own black flames, Jireh had only managed to inflict upon him small burns. First, Lith went to Yandra's side, using invigoration to check on her condition and lessen her pain. Chapter 7:13. Thank the gods you're still alive, Yandra said between gasps and stuttering. The wound being cauterized had prevented her from bleeding out, but she still experienced all the pain such a wound implied. Yet it wasn't the tennis ball-sized hole in her chest that struck Lith like a fist in the stomach, but her collapsing mana core. He refused to surrender, using invigoration to replenish both her stamina and mana, but to no avail. Her blue mana core kept leaking everything he gave her and was already turning cyan. I'm sorry. We should have run away like you wanted. Tears of pain and regret streamed down her cheeks while all he could do was ease the pain of her last moments. No, there were flesh golems waiting for us. The moment we blinked, they would have trapped us with their arrays. We could only fight. Lith replied. Yandra raised her hand in an attempt to reach his cheek. Lith bent down to make things easier for her while supporting her hand with his. Please, tell my children that I didn't abandon them and that my last thoughts, even this last caress, was for them. Tell them that I'm sorry I could never be the mother they deserved. I wasted my life, always giving priority to the wrong things. In the end, I let everyone down. My family, Raynor, even you. If only I could have one more year, chance, breath. Lith would never know what Yandra Mafail was about to say, nor did he care. All he cared about was that she had died in his arms, crying, after everything she had precious had been taken from her. Not even death could make despair disappear from her eyes or face. Lith stored her corpse inside his pocket dimension before going to Morok's side. Are you done playing possum? Lith asked. He knew that such an amount of blood was not enough to kill an emperor beast, and when he had looked at both his fallen comrades with life vision, the tyrant's vigor wasn't what Lith would expect from a dying man. Yes, and thank you for nothing, jackass. While you were playing the hero, I was working my ass to bleed enough to fool that moron without dying. I guess he mustn't know that tyrants have two hearts. Losing one is painful, but not lethal. By the way, I need food, or I'll die for real. To heal these wounds, I need energy, and that fucker has stolen everything I had but my weapons. He showed Lith the two holes in the metal blades. Jireh had left them thinking that they had been damaged beyond repair. Yet Morok only had to sheath and unsheath them again to return them to mint condition. Normally, I would point out to Lith that the trick behind Morok's apparently indestructible blades lies in their scabbards. As he told us back in the camp, they are part of his enchanted weapons, so both the mana crystals and its pseudo-core are actually there. The blades are just an extension that can be regenerated as long as the sheaths remain intact. Yet I don't think that Lith cares about that right now. Yandra's death shook him quite badly. Solus thought. Lith gave the tyrant lots of foods while his mind couldn't stop replaying Carl's death, Nana's death, and his own. The look in Yandra's eyes was the same Lith had when he had looked at Carl's corpse through the obituary glass for its identification. The memory of his own reflection still haunted him to this day. Our deal is off, were the first words Lith said once he snapped out of his own memories. Without the wand, there's no way out unless we rescue Floria. She won't leave without Quilla, and neither would I. You have two choices. You can stay here alone and either die of starvation or by the ODI's hand, or you can help me. That's not much of a choice, Morok said while finishing his meal. I'll help you, but since we don't have much time, you should fill me up with energy. All this fighting has left me drained. Lith invigorated both Morok and himself, wondering how many uses of his breathing technique he had left. What's the plan? The tyrant asked. First, we go check the prison ward. If my friends are still there, we rescue them and warp ourselves here. If not, we have to find and destroy the mana reactor. Without it, the ODI don't stand a chance against true mages that can use spells above tier 3. Morok nodded and used a bit of his new mana to repair his armor. Before leaving, they searched Professor Elkaz's body, discovering that Jireh had already taken away everything but his clothes. They followed the trail of broken cameras to the prison, but Lith didn't need to enter to know that they were too late. There was no energy signature inside, Not even the jailer golem that Raynor had told them about. It seems that shit has hit the fan. They have everything they want. I'm really sorry about your friends, Morok said. His voice was honest and his pain sincere. Without a royal forge master, they were as screwed as the assistants. It's not over yet, Lith replied. I know the way to the lower floor, and we both can see the mana reactor. Follow me. They ran along the corridors, following Elka's instructions that Lith had copied inside Solaspedia. My plan is as follows. If on our way we don't find the place where the spare bodies are held, we destroy the mana reactor, slaughter all the ODI, and then wait until the noxious gas fades. If we find the lab and my friends are still alive, we will be forced to split. You take care of the reactor, and I'll save them. They think that you are dead, and if we keep things that way, they will not realize our plan until it's too late. Is that the reason why you're not destroying the surveillance devices anymore? Morok asked. Yes. They will be too busy bickering and preparing the body-swapping procedure to look at the surveillance mirror. If I were to destroy more devices, I could trigger some alarm and alert them. This way we'll know that our cover has been blown the moment a golem warps in front of us. Wouldn't it be bad? Quite the contrary. I could blink through its gate and reach my destination. With all eyes on me, you'd be free to continue with our plan. Are you kidding me? How am I supposed to open doors and stuff by myself? I'm no forge master, so it would be better to switch our roles. I'll go help your friends, and you take down the reactor. Morok said. Yeah, right. How long do you think you can last against someone with infinite mana? Lith replied. By the way, what are your specializations? Battle Mage and War Mage. I was forced to attend the freaking Fire Griffin to learn the upper tiers of spells because my father couldn't be bothered with me. Gods, you're really useless. Focus more on creation and less on destruction if you want someone to awaken you. Right now, you're just a rude, walking disaster. Lith knew only a few spells of Morok's specializations, but all of them could be easily turned against their own caster by the green array. If push comes to shove, we could split. Solus proposed. I could go with Morok and help him open the doors and shut down the arrays. Chapter 714. No way. Lith refused Solus's offer right off the bat. To stand a chance, I need to be at 200%, which means that I need both your smarts and help. Don't get me started with the consequences that revealing your existence might cause. While they were running along the corridors, Lith and Solus reviewed their fight with Gyra, noticing several things out of place. Why did they send only one ODI to take us down, and how is he linked to the mana reactor? Lith pondered. I doubt they can have made many spheres capable of creating the green array, and even if they did, giving someone infinite mana and conjuring such a powerful array is something even my tower form can't achieve. It probably takes the full output of the mana reactor and geyser to just fuel one person. As for the link, beats me. If I had to take an educated guess, I'd say they have forge mastered their bodies. After all, the reason why the body forge mastering procedure on the specimens failed was that they didn't have enough mana to fuel the enchantments. But if part of the forge mastering process gives them access to infinite mana, the problem is solved. Lith completed the sentence for her. That also means that all those linked to the mana reactor can't leave Kula without getting a new body first, since their survival depends on a constant supply of mana. The further down they went, the clearer Lith could see the mana reactor. It was a giant structure, at least 30 meters, 100 feet, high, placed right in the middle of the natural mana geyser. Somehow, the reactor siphoned most of the geyser, which explained why despite they were right in the middle of one of Mogur's most powerful natural phenomenons, all of their mystical senses worked, whereas in the crystal mine Lith and Solus had been blinded. I guess this also explains where he ODI found so many crystals. This place had to be a mine in the past, Lith thought, while observing the constant stream of world energy being sucked and spun inside the reactor. Lith couldn't see how it was shaped, only how the energy moved inside the device. The world energy was then divided into all of its components before being reassembled in the form of pure mana. The process was intriguing, but Lith was more concerned looking for Quilla's and Floria's energy signatures. He was afraid of arriving too late, to see their expression fixed by death in a state of pure despair like it had happened to Yandra. Even worse, he was afraid to arrive just in time to see their bodies perfectly fine, but occupied by someone else. Lith wouldn't hesitate to kill someone who was just borrowing Floria's appearance. but it would still be the proof that he was as helpless now as he had been on Earth. Calm down. The body-swapping procedure is bound to be difficult. No one can remove the skinwalker armors except for their wearer, so they'll probably leave Floria and Quilla for last. That, or they'll shatter my prototypes with their ridiculous array. Damn me and my avarice. Why didn't I prepare something better for them? Lith thought. When they reached the 5th underground floor, the two rangers perceived an odd vibration running through the metal structure surrounding them. Lith also heard muffled screams, but both Solus and Morok confirmed to him that the corridor was actually silent. Lith had been feeling strange since he had discovered to be able to understand the words of the ODI's victims, but now that sensation was getting stronger with each step he took. Something was stirring inside of him, almost triggering his memory about it, but every time he was about to recognize it, the feeling stopped. It was like listening to a familiar jingle, but only to its first notes, making it much harder to remember the name of the song. On the 6th underground floor, Lith almost felt dizzy. The noise ringing in his head was becoming unbearable, and not even hushing his ears worked. The silver lining was that they had reached the mana reactor's level. Both rangers could clearly see it in the distance and were near to their destination. Lith's stomach was churning because they had yet to find any trace of his friends. For security reasons, the stairs leading to the upper and lower levels were located at the opposite ends of each floor. He had hoped that he would find Floria by looking through the walls, ceiling, and ground on his way down, but reality had proven him wrong. Lith was about to ask Solus for an analysis of their situation when he noticed that all the shadows that the lights projected were now filled with angry mouths and eyes. They would appear and disappear every time he blinked. Once again, Lith was the only one who seemed to be able to perceive the strange phenomenon. To make matters worse, now the ground was trembling so much that the rangers thought that an earthquake was about to happen. Don't worry about them, Lith. If something bad had happened to Floria and Quilla, we would feel it, she said, trying to calm him down. That's bullshit and you know it. When my brother had the car accident, the only thing I felt was the urge to get a cab and go to work. Where the fuck are they? My guess is somewhere near the reactor. According to Kala, the ODI laid the foundations for lichhood, so we can assume that the reactor works akin to a phylactery. Solus said. They didn't use it to win the war because the further they get from it, the weaker they become. Ripping someone's life force away and replacing it entirely is a mammoth task, on par with splitting and removing a mana core like a lich does. I think that the lab where they forge master the flesh golems, use the life merging process, and perform the body swapping are all near the reactor, so to maximize their odds of success. Based on what happened to Kala and what we know about forge mastering, they only have one shot for each body. There are no do-overs. Lith thanked her, focusing on life vision even more while scouting his surroundings. He much preferred a hard truth to wishful thinking. The reactor was a beacon. The rangers didn't need to read the signs to know where to go. Much to Lith's dismay, the door leading to their destination was blocked by two flesh golems. Clearly the ODI were at least as paranoid as he was, and they weren't willing to take any risk of their improvised plan to resurrect their civilization to be ruined just because they had miscounted the hairless monkeys. Fuck, we have to fight them one-on-one. I'm not much worried at the idea of facing a golem again, as much of wasting our time and blowing our cover, Morok said while scouting the area from around a corner. Don't worry, we'll kill them so fast that when Mr. See-Through arrives we'll already be next to the mana reactor. At that point, we'll have the upper hand. That kind of device is delicate. Fighting in its proximity means destroying it. Lith replied, What makes you so sure of our success? We're both highly motivated. Lith shape-shifted into his hybrid form. Floria is in a room nearby the reactor, so neither of us has any reason to hold back. It's do or die, and I've got no intention of dying. Chapter 715. The late Professor Neschel was right. For a single warden, keeping two arrays at the ready was impossible, and so was for two different wardens to activate both their arrays at the same time. Unless, of course, they shared a mind link that allowed them to synchronize their very thoughts and perceptions. As soon as we are done casting, I want you to use invigoration and recover your strength. An array is too much of a burden for your green core. I want you at your 100% to face that ODI's anatomy model. Lith thought. But the strain on your body, Solus objected. I don't give a damn about having a perfect body just to die like a lab rat at the hands of those madmen. Lith cut her short. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself. If something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself for dragging you to Kula. Jump on my back and strike at their power core on my mark. I can't see their power core, you dimwit. Morok replied. My soul will light your way. Morok was about to sneer at the happy-go-lucky bullshit Lith had just spewed when the hybrid unfolded his wings, using a flight spell, air magic, and air fusion to fly as fast as a bullet. When the flesh golems noticed them, Lith activated his earth-blocking array while Solus used her air-blocking and used light magic to draw an X where the construct's power core was located. A second later, Morok's hammers had smashed their target, while Lith's orichalcum glove had pierced his own. Lith used invigoration on the door in front of them to release its lock, while keeping an ear at the creature's last breaths. /U003C grid 325627 32,562 /U003E the female construct said while searching for Lith's eyes with hers. /U003C 893465 893465 8934 /U003E the male golem repeated his message as fast as he could, but to Morok it was gibberish, so he ignored him. Lith didn't miss that the door in front of them just had a card reader, making such numbers pointless. Two small wisps of light came out of their remains, but instead of shooting towards the ceiling like it had happened before, Lith saw them getting sucked through the door and into the reactor. What the heck was that? Morok asked, but Lith could only shrug in reply, reverting to his human form. The door clicked, revealing an enormous cave, at least 30 meters, 100 feet, high and 50 meters, 166 feet, wide. In the middle of the cave, there was a pillar made of metal and mana crystals that pierced the only part of the ground not covered by the metal plates, digging deep into Mogur's crust. Even though the pillar was so tall that it reached the ceiling and was larger than any tower both rangers had ever seen, they could barely distinguish its features. In front of them, there was a green grid made of energy that blocked their path just after a couple of meters from the door. So much for our blitz. Morok whined. How did you miss something this huge? Lith had no idea how to reply since both he and Solus could see only with their conventional sight. The energy net was invisible to their mystical senses. The tyrant had enough surprises for a lifetime, so instead of trying to blink, he tried and failed to open a warp steps on the other side of the grid. Somehow the 2 points in space couldn't be connected. I could say the same about your eyes, Lith said, noticing that the ODI had crushed the holographic pad on the outside, leaving intact only the one inside the barrier. Grid 325627, Lith repeated, sending a tendril of mana through the barrier. He could still reach the other terminal with spirit magic. Or so he thought until a fizzle and a shower of sparks crushed his hopes. This is not magic, Lith said, understanding the nature of the obstacle in front of them. Nor is it a spell, a construct, or an array. This is pure mana, without an energy signature that I can recognize. They couldn't afford to waste time, but Lith was actually thinking out loud to better study their situation and giving his partners the means to help him. He noticed that just like normal barriers, the grid didn't completely seal the cave from the external world. Light and air could still pass through, so all he had to do was follow the ODI's lead when they had forced the assistants to leave the camp. This is going to hurt, Lith said while generating a strong light from a high point behind him, making his shadow grow long enough to reach the hollow pad. Then, he infused his mana into his own projection, to give it life as he had already done in the past. That's amazing. How do you call this spell? Morok had never seen such a trick, not even from his father. It has no name. Lith was too focused and embarrassed to tell him that his personal variant of spirit magic had a cringy name like Demons of Darkness. Lith had used that name during his mission in Xantia for his play with Freya. The thing on the other side was half shadow and half made of Lith's mana, so he knew that it was only a matter of time before the barrier recognized it as a threat or at least an anomaly. 325. The shadow needed to be solid to interact with the pad. At the 3, Lith felt his skin crawling. At the 2, the green energy of the barrier started to seep into the dark streak connecting Lith to his double, forcing him to double his focus to counter that invasion. At the 5, it was as if he was touching a live wire. 6, The green energy was now invading his body, charring Lith's feet while it worked its way up. 2. Lith was forced to use darkness fusion to cut off his pain receptors and a massive amount of mana to stop the grid from reaching his mana core. 7. The green dot on the pad was replaced by a red one as the grid disappeared. Morok blinked right behind the reactor, bringing Lith with him and preparing for the arrival of the enemy. Lith was doing his best, helped by Solus, to cleanse his body by the still lingering green energy. His mana core was shaken from both the assault and the strain it had sustained, to the point that Lith didn't feel safe using invigoration. If his mana core mistook the pure mana for world energy, there was no telling what damage it could inflict upon him. Only when his body was once again filled with mana carrying his own energy signature did Lith use his breathing technique to heal his wounds. Solus didn't have the heart to tell him that he was almost charred from the waist down, but the hunger that overwhelmed Lith once he was able to stand on his own again wasn't so kind. Lith had started gulping down the second of Solus's disgusting nutrients tonics when 2 more flesh golems appeared. Life vision allowed him to see that Gyra wasn't with them. Also, they had warped right next to their fallen comrades, which likely meant that the grid was off limits to them as well. Chapter 716. Lith shared his discoveries with Morok while closely following the golem's movements. I guess our cover is blown. The tyrant sighed. No, only mine. Lith shook his head. I collected the corpses of both professors not only to return them to their families once we get out of here, but also because if one of them goes checking the place where we fought the ODI, they will think I destroyed the bodies of my fallen comrades. Remember that mine is the only death that hasn't been confirmed, whereas the hole in your chest was pretty convincing. Also, our cover was blown the moment we took down those constructs. Okay, 2 questions then. First, how do we dispose of them? Second, the reactor is really big. Any idea of how to destroy it? Morok asked. Lith looked around the room before answering. There were 3 doors leading outside. The one they had arrived from, the one leading where Floria and the others were, and a third one he had no idea what purpose could it have. Lith couldn't see any energy coming from behind it, so it was useless to him. He had no time to explore the compound. I have a plan for the golems. As for the reactor, we still have 1 code from the golems we have just defeated. Let's search for a holographic pad with numbers. Maybe it's the shut-down code. Lith said, I take back what I've said earlier about your eyes. Speaking with corpses is damn useful. By the way, how do I distinguish ODI letters from numbers? Morok had never bothered learning how to recognize them because he had all the professor's notes stored in his dimensional amulet, but now it was lost. Lith groaned, making a copy for him of both the code and a comparative table between the ODI's numbers and their own. Meanwhile, the flesh golems outside the room had completed their report and moved toward the door. Lith stepped out of his hiding spot, checking for the presence of surveillance devices while spreading tendrils of spirit magic in every direction. As he expected, the room had no cameras, likely to avoid the security codes from being spied, and because the mana grid was already a formidable defense. Contrary to his expectations, 1 golem entered from the door while the other one warped in front of the room where Lith's friends were, making him curse. His trick was likely to work only once, and it needed the constructs to attack at the same time. Do you want me to cast the elemental blocking array? Solus asked. No, I can't afford wasting more mana in arrays, and neither can you. Invigoration has only a limited number of uses, and we have yet to face Mr. Anatomy Model. Lith thought. Luckily, the second golem had just gone checking that no one had entered the lab before moving to the reactor room. The lab's door lead directly inside the grid, allowing it to operate the commands and let its partner in. Both constructs were surprised seeing the intruder and the energy field deactivated, but being more machines than persons, their feelings caused no delay in their response to the threat. One ran toward Lith while the other activated its warping array to cover the distance separating them. Lith moved all the tendrils he had prepared at once, touching the holographic pad and restoring the grid. The warping array instantly collapsed, cutting the first golem in half, while the remaining tendrils of mana wrapped around the second construct that was already inside the energy cage and sent it slamming against the barrier. The results were impressive. The moment the golem touched the green grid, its body was pulverized as if it was sand passing through a sieve. Lith's only gripe with his strategy was that by instantly killing them, he had missed the opportunity to obtain more information. Quick, we don't have much time, Lith said while looking around for another pad. He left the grid active to prevent anyone from warping while he was distracted. If even the golem had been forced to use the door, the ODI were bound to do the same, especially since they seemed to be incapable of using dimensional magic. I really hope those were the last constructs. Morok's mystical senses were useless while in front of the mana reactor. Its raw power blinded him, so he could only use his natural sight. Lith and Solus had the same problem, making them wish they had a Royal Forge Master Wand with them. Even by using Invigoration on the reactor, it would take them quite a while to search it thoroughly. There's no pad here, just metal and crystals, Morok said. Go check the other door inside the grid. If they protected it from dimensional magic, there must be a reason. Lith had yet to finish examining the reactor with Invigoration and couldn't afford to waste one single second. There was something wrong with the ODI's device, something that made it painful for him to use his breathing technique like usual. It had never happened before, yet Lith was too focused to care about the cold shiver running down his spine. The only thing he could think of was cracking the mystery in front of him. The mana reactor was just like Solus. It had both a mana flow and a life force, yet the two living artifacts couldn't have been more different. While Solus was a person with her energy signature, her stone body, and the red wind of life coming out of it, the reactor was a maelstrom of energy signatures, a bodiless mass of pure energy, which emitted constant screams of agony. Now that he was so close, he could see the red of life and the black of death endlessly turning into one another. Lith could swear that the reactor was trying to pull him inside, just like it had done with the golem's wisps. Only his body prevented his energy from being stolen. Lith felt dizzy and nauseous. The longer he remained in contact with the reactor, the more he could feel the lives spinning inside its bowels. More stairs. They seemed to lead to the upper floors again. Weird. Any news? Morok asked upon his return. None. Use your best spells and find a way to shut this thing down. I'm going in. Lith didn't wait for a reply and ran towards the lab, his mind filled with doubts. Was the golem trying to deceive me, or did I fail to understand its message? After all, while the woman mentioned the grid, the man just repeated a sequence of numbers. Could it be another code for the grid's pad? Lith thought. Unlikely. My best guess is that if you input the wrong number, you sound the alarm, cause the grid to fill the whole room, killing any intruder, or both. Solus thought, while studying the defensive device pattern. She was almost certain that the grid could be moved. The next room was nothing like Lith had imagined it. The wall on his left was filled with what resembled monitors to him, from which he could observe the whole facility of Kula, both above and below levels. The camp was still filled with the toxic gas, so using the elevator to escape was out of the question. The rest of the monitors didn't show anything interesting, just empty corridors and rooms. Chapter 717. There was a keyboard below the monitors that allowed its user to switch between the different cameras, but Lith had no idea how to operate it. There was no mouse, and his coding skills were nihil for Earth's operating systems, let alone for alien technology. On the right side of the room, there was an empty cylindrical water tank, similar to the one that contained the pseudo-bailer in the body enhancement department, but much more complex and refined. Several cables of different colors went from the nearby wall to and inside the tank. Every single centimeter of it was covered in runes of power that Lith had never seen before, making it both a powerful artifact and the focus of at least 20 different arrays. Lith noticed that there was a single set of footprints going from the tank to the monitors and moving around the room. Lith followed them with his eyes, noticing that for some reason, the man from the tank had stopped in front of a wall. Lith used Invigoration, discovering a hidden compartment that had been cloaked against detecting spells, life vision included. Triggering it was easy. One of the metal bolts was actually a switch that once pressed made 2 stone slabs slide, revealing a holographic pad protecting a safe. 893465. After checking with Invigoration for traps, Lith entered the password. The pad disappeared while the safe opened. Inside there were 3 books, each one several centimeters thick. Lith put them inside Soluspedia to examine them. He couldn't read the ODI language, but judging by the pictures, they were the schematics for all Kula's successful projects. Fuck me sideways. The flesh golems folder doesn't help me one bit, and neither does the body swapping book. The pictures are self-explanatory, and I can't find any weak point just by looking at them. The mana reactor, however, is a different story. The part on this floor, it's seamless. I doubt Warlock could damage it unless he manages to make the mana crystals detonate. The schematics show that its structure reaches the upper floor, where there is a metal gate from which specimens can be thrown inside the reactor for a reason I don't understand. I must inform Warlock of this before. Lith thought when he discovered that his before was already expired. Gyra, the one that Lith referred to as Mr. Anatomy Model due to his translucent skin that allowed to see his muscles and organs as if he was some kind of plastic toy, had just walked inside the same room where Floria was. Normally Lith would weave his best spells, preparing for the fight, but the enemy's green array made most of them useless, so he preferred to save all of his energies for those abilities that couldn't be turned against him. Okay, filthy bastard, just pick one of them who's not Quilla or Floria, so I'll have all the time I need to inform Warlock. Lith thought. Unfortunately, after examining all of their prisoners, the ODI had moved Floria on the bottom of the body rankings and had decided to experiment on her to check if their body-swapping procedure was still effective on humans. Despite her powerful mana core, with her height and build, she was the least charming female specimen according to their standards. Even when they had mistaken her for a man, she ranked pretty low. With her light bronze skin, fit body, and callous hands, she was the embodiment of everything a noble ODI despised. Hard work under the sun was something that only slaves did, not to mention that her height was too far from what they considered perfection. Gyra closed in on her and released Floria from the red chains restraining her. Then he used an air spell to move her on what looked like a table. Lith wished with all of his strength for the ODI to go away again, so that he could speak with Warlock while Solus freed his friend. Once again, wishes proved to be a waste of time. Thanks to life vision, Lith could see through the walls that part of the energy from the mana reactor was flowing inside crystal cables linked to whatever Floria was lying on. Lith clenched his fist so hard that his knuckles turned white, yet before taking action, he had to wait the moment when the ODI's full focus was on his best friend. Wait a minute, Solus thought. If he takes Floria's body, what need does he have for the other members of the expedition? I'll ask him after I rip his head off. Lith replied, darting inside the room the moment mana started to flow through Gyra's body. Lith was in his peak condition, so he infused his body with all the elements and went all out right from the start. He entered the body swapping room moving so fast to be barely a blur. Inside, instead of the usual metal, the room was entirely made of stone carved out with earth magic to allow the world energy to saturate its air. All the remaining members of the expedition were lined up along the wall in order of importance on Lith's right. Each one of them was restrained by red chains that kept them healthy while preventing them from using magic. In the middle of the room, there was a stone table where Floria was. She was conscious but deadly pale. The red chains had healed her wounds, but without being properly fed, she was so weak that she didn't have the strength to fight. Above and below the table, there were bundles of cables that ended into two purple mana crystals, pointing respectively at Floria's forehead and nape. Gyra had already activated the God's Will array to maximize the procedure's chance of success, so he managed to react fast enough to spread his fingers and release 5 energy beams. Lith had already seen that trick and was expecting it. He bent down, passing right under the beams before stepping inside the array against his better judgment. I don't know exactly what the green array does, but if I can't attack from a distance, then close combat is my only option, he thought. Like Warlock had previously told Lith, the mana reactor not only did provide the ODI with infinite mana, but also split the world energy into its base components, providing them with the next best thing to fusion magic. Gyra kept the beams active, sweeping down his hand and cutting through stone and metal as if he was projecting a laser grid while he stepped back. Lith grinned, noticing that the array hadn't moved along with the ODI. Lith crouched even lower, executing a right leg sweep that almost took his enemy by surprise. Gyra's air fusion allowed him to see Lith's move and react by taking a single step back, putting the enemy right under his line of fire. Great was Gyra's surprise when the sweep struck at his legs nonetheless, sending him flying while his own energy beams almost damaged the priceless machinery. Lith had partially shape-shifted his body into his hybrid form to succeed. His hybrid legs were longer than his human forms, something that he had worked hard to prevent the ODI from discovering. He then used the sweep spin to pivot on his left foot and turned the sweep into a roundhouse kick. The orichalcum-covered talons of his foot cut deeply into the ODI's chest. Jirah's outrage knew no bounds. The perfect body of a god had just been defiled by a hairless, treacherous monkey. Chapter 718. Two more beams departed from Jirah's eyes while he was slamming against the back wall, taking Lith by surprise. Both rays struck at Lith's heart with enough strength to make him bounce off the floor, filling it with cracks, and then crash against the metal door. Jirah had used pure mana to attack, giving the beams the same energy of a speeding truck in exchange for the lack of any piercing ability. The results were nothing to scoff at. Jirah had clearly heard the human's bones shatter not only when he had been hit by the beams, but also every time Lith had struck a hard surface. The small pool of blood forming under Lith's head was a clear sign of how deadly the ODI's aim had been. Jirah could sense the enemy's life force fading, so he focused on the body-swapping device to make sure that it had sustained no damage. A snapping sound was all that warned him of the impending danger. Somehow, the ranger was inside the god's will array again, with his silver-clawed hand aimed at Jirah's brain. The ODI stepped back, emitting energy beams from both his eyes and hands, but Lith was fast enough to crouch down in time to dodge them. Then, he used his hands to deflect the opponents to the side and his head to struck upwards at the ODI's chin, sending all of his ray against either the floor or the ceiling. Jirah's rage exploded when he tasted his own blood invading his mouth, something that had never happened to him, not even during the Great War. Two more beams, this time made from the fire element, erupted from his open palms, striking respectively Lith's head and heart. Jirah could now see the reason why his opponent had managed to survive this far. A split second before the impact, Lith's whole body was covered by orichalcum, which had absorbed part of the impact. The two new rays were strong enough to push the metal liquid aside and reach their target. Even though their trajectory had been deflected by the skinwalker armor's energy field, a smell of barbecue spread throughout the room as half of Lith's face evaporated. The blood from his wounds generated a spray of red fog while his body crashed against the metal door again before sprawling on the ground. /U003C, stay down, damn it. /U003, Jirah said while unleashing several bullets of darkness magic to destroy the enemy corpse. Much to his surprise, the corpse wasn't a corpse. A simple wave of Lith's hand deflected the bullets. Out of habit, Jirah had used fist magic again, but outside the god's will array, the dark projectiles had returned to be just a very powerful cantrip. Lith's body floated in mid-air, allowing him to stand up, also revealing the flesh and muscles of his face regenerating at a speed visible at the naked eye, until no trace of the wound was left. /U003C, that's impossible. Humans cannot have achieved an immortal body before the ODI. /U003, Jirah refused to believe his own eyes. He knew about the existence of awakened ones, but he had no idea what exactly their powers were. Hence, he wasn't aware that each time Lith was about to be struck, instead of tensing up and clenching his teeth, he simply took a deep breath with invigoration. That would make the healing process start even before a wound could be opened. The destructive power of each energy beam had been greatly reduced because Lith's tissues and bones healed so fast that the beams had to damage each layer of his body multiple times before managing to go deeper. Jirah wasn't a golem. With each second of his stupor, he allowed Lith, who was insensitive to pain thanks to darkness fusion, to breathe regularly. With every breath, his body healed. With every breath, his strength returned. A snap of Lith's fingers made all of the chains restraining the prisoners open in unison, plunging the room into chaos. No one cared about how Lith had done it. The only thing they wanted was to get out of there. Well, you only need to shoot beams from your mouth, nipples, and crotch to have the complete set. Lith said. He was usually deaf to the rantings of his enemies. Talking was just a waste of breath that would only encourage more babbling. Lith was a firm believer that during a fight, less was more. Unless, of course, he needed to buy some time. Only in such a case Would he indulge the madness of his opponents? Like now, when he was waiting that soulless return by his side. The first time Lith had stepped inside the green array, he had made sure that the enemy was unaware of her existence and incapable of detecting her despite her half-artifact nature. The second time, Solus had exploited the moment after the leg sweep to reach the prisoners unnoticed and spread her body between the chains before activating Zalgrish's eraser. The impression of a multiple clean slate spell being cast from a distance was what Lith needed to reinforce the enemy's shock, and buy even more time. "Quilla, follow my hand," he said, handing her the book about the mana reactor opened at the right page, while a trail of fire and darkness resembling a human hand flew through the air, leading her toward Morok. When Lith had arrived, Quilla had hoped to be able to fight by his side, but the two clashes she had just witnessed were more than enough to make her understand that whatever the ODI was, it was beyond her capabilities. The idea of leaving her friend to fight alone against an ancient horror while her sister was still strapped to the stone table made her clench her teeth so hard that for a moment she thought they would break. Quilla didn't raise questions nor objections. She just took the book and followed the mystical hand's trail, ignoring everything else. Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, Ranger Eerie was giving his all to damage the mana reactor, but to no avail. Not only was its metal exterior extremely sturdy, but also it seemed to weaken and absorb all the mana that came in contact with it. Even destroying the protruding mana crystals had turned out to be quite hard, and so far, it didn't seem to have caused any significant damage. No matter if he used tier 4 or 5 spells, the best he had achieved was to leave bumps and scratches. Fuck. This is just a waste of time. Since I can't go any further below, I might as well go see what's on the upper floor, he said, right before the door in front of him opened. Morok made just in time to revert to his human form and hold back the spell he was about to unleash, thinking that the newcomers were once again golems. Soldiers and assistants were all so scared that none of them noticed the small figure of the ranger near the mana reactor. Quilla kept running to follow the mystical hand that was pointing to the door leading to the upper floor. She had seen the reactor, the picture at the page Lith had handed them, and the door. It was enough for her to do the math. Morok followed her, hoping to receive good news. "Has Lith won already?" he asked. "No, but if we don't destroy this thing, we'll all end up as spare parts," she replied while heavily panting. If not for the adrenaline rush, she would barely be able to stand, let alone think clearly. Chapter 719. The soldiers were terrified. Without their weapons and equipment, they felt as if they were naked, but the worst thing was the acknowledgement of being completely helpless. Even if they were still fully armed, there was nothing they could do. Once freed, they had run away out of survival instinct, but now they realized that it had been a pointless action. There was no way out of the underground facility, nor a place where they could hide. The assistants didn't stop thinking. They just kept running toward any door they could see to get as further away as they could from that nightmare. Quilla was getting weaker by the second, but since she seemed to know what she was doing, Morok gave her a bit of his life force and carried her in his arms up the staircase. The door was unlocked, leading inside a room even bigger than the reactor itself. The walls were covered in dimensional runes, which made Morok's heart flutter, at least until he remembered that he had no idea what was written on them. "You have a Forgemaster wand, correct? We can escape if you activate one of those runes," he said. "No can do. First, I'm not leaving my sister and my friend behind. Second, they took my wand. So unless you want to retrieve it, we're stuck." Quilla stared at the reactor's upper part that entered the room through the floor, trying to make a sense of the picture in the book she held. "Damn, I rotten. Wait, you said they who?" he asked. "The blue guy in Gaku. She has sold us to the enemy. That bitch speaks the ODI language, so she must have cut herself a deal." Since the situation still made no sense, Quilla used her Forgemaster spells on the reactor to understand how it worked. The moment her first spell was completed, her eyes rolled back, showing only the white, and she started to puke uncontrollably, crying her eyes out. "What the fuck is going on?" he blurted out while trying to stop Quilla's seizure from harming her. The reactor's insulation was lighter on its upper part, so she had experienced something even worse than what Lith had felt while using invigoration. The term mana reactor was just a fancy word to hide its real purpose. In order for the device to work, countless lives had been thrown into the mana geyser below Quilla. The life forces of the ODI's victims had been modified so that they could absorb the world energy and filter it with their bodies, turning it into mana. The structure made of metal and mana crystal had only the function to store and contain the energy, while the reactor purified the mana produced from its energy signature to allow the ODI to use it freely. Yet because of its nature, it wasn't just the energy that the reactor had stored. Every single living being that had been thrown inside the device was still in there. The world energy would invade their bodies and mana cores, making them explode due to the failed awakening process. Yet thanks to the modifications they had sustained and the reactor splitting the world energy into its 6 components, the light element would heal them the moment they were damaged, keeping the living fuel in an eternal cycle of death and rebirth. Some of them had even turned into abominations, but they were trapped as well. They had no advantage over their peers, quite the contrary. Their black cores were the perfect filters, so the amount of energy they endured was much greater, and so was their suffering. The mana reactor was akin to a cauldron where world energy, flesh, and souls were constantly burned to provide the ODI with unlimited power. Quilla's spells had made her feel just a spark of the suffering those trapped inside its bowels perceived every single second, yet it was enough to drive her insane. When Jireh snapped out of his stupor, all of his prisoners had escaped. He considered it just a minor inconvenience, since he could always capture them again later. What worried him was the odd creature in front of him. Jireh had no idea how Lith could still be alive. /U003C surrender now, or she dies. /U003E since the human had come that far to rescue them. Jireh assumed they were important for him. A condensed sphere of light was now pointing at Floria's head, burning her hair. Do it, and your precious machine come next. Lith pointed his hand to what looked like a console installed in the wall, to which most cables were linked. The bolt of lightning on his hand was strong enough to turn it into scraps. None of the 2 men could understand the other's words, but their actions spoke volumes. Jireh realized that his earlier assumption was wrong. Even while he was making the female on the table scream in pain, the male was unfazed, still charging his lightning. Lith was actually furious. Each one of Floria's cries of agony, every single drop of blood she shed, was enough to make him lose his mind. The scene reminded him of his father, Ezio, beating his brother Carl while he could only stand and watch. Yet Lith managed to control his rage, turning it into fuel to his power rather than fire burning his mind. In a hostage situation, giving in to demands was idiotic. The hostage had only value as a shield. If Lith surrendered, she was as good as dead. Lith released his spell, making Jireh gasp in surprise for more than one reason. The console was inside the God's Will array, so instead of giving the thunderbolt a straight trajectory, Lith moved it along the array's borders, so that it entered the magical formation from the nearest point to the terminal. Also, Lith hadn't wasted his time charging it with mana, but with his own will. Between the strong imprint he had left and the lightning's natural speed, Jireh was forced to commit his entire focus to stop the spell before it destroyed his life work. Lith charged in, his hands turning into orichalcum-covered claws, one aimed to Jireh's brain and the other to the sphere embedded in his body that allowed him to use the green array. Lith moved so fast that Jireh was forced to let some of the energy go and unleash a barrage of small energy beams, to not give Lith any place where to dodge. Much to his surprise, the human didn't dodge, but deflected the beams with his arm and legs. Cracking sounds could be heard once more, but this time Lith only slid back of a few meters. The enemy attack didn't even have the strength to make him fly away anymore. Jireh was shocked, throwing the lightning back against Lith only to discover that it was nothing more than a light show. While the ODI was starting to panic, invigoration fixed Lith's limbs. /U003C what's wrong? Why doesn't our array work anymore? /U003E Jireh said. /U003C calm down, you idiot. Just look at its runes. /U003E Vega pointed out. It was only then that Jireh noticed that even though the magical formation was still standing, several of its power nodes had been destroyed. Lith hadn't blindly charged in, but had followed a methodical plan. His attacks had always been just a distraction, to force the ODI to reveal his cards and making him fail to notice that Lith was using his spells to strike at God's will's power nodes, just like Vaster had taught him. Chapter 720. That way, the array would still work, but its effects would be greatly diminished with each lost node. Even while Gyro was studying his predicament, he saw tendrils of Litha's mana coming from below the floor and crash another node. Come on, pal. You just have to turn it off and on again to reset it, Lith said while a blue aura erupted from his body and several spells could be seen on the verge of taking form. Looking at Litha's savage smile, Gyro felt an endless fear taking hold of him. Sure, the ODI could do as Lith had suggested, but taking down the array meant remaining completely exposed to Litha's spells. Gyro was in a pinch. As long as God's will was active, the enemy could only engage him in physical combat. Yet the longer they fought, the weaker the array's power-focusing ability would become. Lith had attacked only one of the array's functions on purpose, to not make his opponent realize what was happening until it was too late. Lith could almost taste the blood of his enemy, almost hear his dying screams. Litha's teeth became the size of small knives and his cheeks covered in scales. Gyro involuntarily took a step back from the grinning monster in front of him. The ODI had seen the monster moving. The second he needed to reset the array was a second too long. At least as long as the creature remained on the fringes of God's will. To make matters worse, he couldn't just move the array, so its area of effect was fixed until he replaced it with a new one. A clicking sound made Gyro look down, just in time to notice that somehow, the human female was now free. Yet instead of running away, Floria placed her hands on his abdomen, releasing a fireball from point-blank range. What the ODI had confused for ramblings of agony were actually magic words. The moment a chance of survival had appeared, Floria had started to cast all of her best spells. Yet after seeing the ODI controlling Litha's spells as if they were his own, she had been forced to change her tactic. If she had to die, she would die fighting, without leaving the ODI anything but a broken carcass. The fireball exploded too fast and too close for even God's will to have any effect. The detonation made Gyro fly against the back wall and cracked both the table and the mana crystals. Her own mana couldn't hurt Floria, but it could still hurt Lith and Solus, who was hiding under the table after undoing Floria's bindings. Lith rushed forward, uncaring of the flames and the heat. It was his opportunity to both rescue his partner and put down his enemy. The orichalcum enveloped Lith, protecting his lungs from the hot air that was making it hard for Gyro to breathe. His midriff was shredded. Only the constant infusion of light magic from the reactor had prevented his viscera from being on the floor rather than where they were supposed to be. Gyro saw Lith approaching. The air element coursing through Gyro's body allowed him to follow the monster's movements. The ODI joined his hands, focusing all the energy he could muster in the biggest energy beam he could conjure in such a short time. He used water magic to cool the air and hopefully turn the enemy into a popsicle. Even if weakened, the green array made the beam too fast for Lith to dodge, but weak enough to be blocked. Litha's right arm deflected it while his left arm pierced the enemy's brain first and heart later, releasing each time powerful spells that made the ODI's body parts explode like water balloons, emitting a wet sound. Lith was about to strike at the sphere that controlled the array when Gyro overloaded his life force, causing an explosion powerful enough to send both Lith and Floria crashing against the door. This is impossible, Lith thought. There is no spell that can keep you alive with your brain and heart destroyed. I've seen his life force fade like it happened to all those who I killed in the past. How could he activate such a spell, and why is the array still standing? Lith was right, Gyro was dead. Yet the same didn't apply to all the other ODI he was sharing his body with. When Kula's researchers had understood that no one was coming to save them, they had used the body merging project to have their numbers but double their lifespan by alternating who was in control of the body. Only the active life force would be consumed, while the other would be preserved. Yet it also meant having the speed of their research, since there was only so much work that a single body could do. With each of their failure, the ODI's number would decrease, until they had decided to merge all inside a single body, to buy as much time as they could while waiting for rescue. The tank where they had slept slowed their metabolism to 1/10. so that each one of them would only lose 1 day of life force after 10 days. The ODI had spent the last few centuries switching from one body to another, prolonging the existence of their doomed race. When the other ODI had felt Jirah's consciousness fade and his precious lifespan go to waste, they had activated the detonation spell engraved in his body to buy enough time for the next of them to take charge. Lith used invigoration on both Floria and himself while trying to make heads or tails of the events. She was just wounded while his frozen right arm was second away from shattering into pieces. Only when he saw Jirah's body shape shift into another much more muscular body did Lith understand what life merging meant. All the injuries he had inflicted upon his earlier enemy had disappeared, and even though just the hair color distinguished Jirah from Rizzo, their energy signatures couldn't have been more different. Rizzo took an elaborate longsword and a heavy armor out of Elkaz's dimensional ring that was now his own. Once their owner was dead, their imprint on an enchanted item would disappear. Dimensional items were easy to use, and the ODI had seen their specimens use them multiple times from their cameras, so the first thing they had done after killing the useless old coots was to find one and use it to store all of their best equipment. In that single ring, there were the results of countless experiments conducted in Kulla, plus the best equipment that the ODI could craft during their empire's golden age. Wake up, kid. After Quilla's seizure had stopped and Morok had made sure with his diagnostic spells that nothing bad had happened to her, the tyrant had tried his best to make her regain consciousness. Up to that moment, healing magic, buckets of cold water, and yelling had proven to be useless. If we don't do something, we're all going to die. At least tell me what the heck this picture means. The open ODI book didn't make sense to him. It only showed a hatch and the reactor, but that was something he could see with his own eyes. Chapter 721. Since Quilla kept being useless, Morok stood up and conjured his strongest Tier 5 War Mage spell, Wheel of Fate. Usually, it had an area of effect too big to be used in a closed space, but the reactor's maintenance room was big enough to accommodate 2 of such spells. For rings, each one made of a different elemental energy and as big as a Ferris wheel surrounded the reactor. Normally, there would be 5 of them, but without Earth to manipulate, that part of the spell was just a waste of mana. The 4 rings attacked the structure in turns. Darkness first to weaken the structure and all the spells it was imbued with, then fire to heat the reactor until its metal parts were white hot. Then followed the water ring, to inflict a powerful thermal shock and drench the enemy in water, so that the ensuing lightning ring could seep through all the cracks that the previous attacks had opened. Several mana crystals exploded, and the lights in the room flickered while the spell relentlessly hammered the mana reactor, almost giving the now-awake Quilla a heart attack. What are you doing, you idiot? If you destroy the opening mechanism, we will never stop the reactor in time, she said. The what now? Morok dispelled the wheel with a wave of his hand. Can't you see the hatch on the picture? She slammed the book under his nose. We have no chance of destroying the mana reactor with normal spells. For the god's sake, how can you think that something made to contain infinite mana can be harmed by mana? Now that you point that out, it explains why my strategy wasn't very effective on the lower floor, but here the shielding is lighter. No matter how sturdy a dam is, it only takes a crack to take it down. Morok quoted his wise father. Yeah, too bad we are in front of the dam. I'm sure that Lith asked you to find a way to turn it off, not to blow us all in the greatest conflagration Mogr has ever seen. What part of infinite mana isn't clear to you? Fine, Egghead. Then what's your brilliant plan? Morok firmly believed that attack was the best defense, especially when there was nothing you could say to make you appear less moronic. To fuel the reactor, the ODI need to throw living creatures down that hatch. Is that clear? She asked, and Morok nodded for her to continue. Then if we trick the system into believing that it's recharge time, but we throw inside something hard to digest instead of fresh meat, the inbuilt safety measures will stop its functioning. I doubt that the ODI planned on dying at the first misoperation, and since the reactor is powerful enough to blow its way out to the surface, there must be a panic button or something. We just need to trigger it. Quilla walked to the mana reactor and started to compare the picture with the real thing in front of her. It took her but a wave of her hand to get rid of the layer of frost covering the console and the several monitors. Good job, jackass. Most of them are broken, she said while using water and air magic to dry everything. in the hope that at least some of them would start working again. Who cares? It's not like any of us can read that gibberish. Morok acted tough, but he was starting to realize why his father had refused to awaken him until the young tyrant would learn to think more with his 2 brains and less with his 2 fists. Yeah, but at least we could have watched the fucking images. Quilla would have stabbed him to death if the ODI hadn't taken everything from her but her skinwalker armor. And not for a lack of trying. Even a golem's level of strength was pointless against an artifact capable of switching from the solid to the liquid state at will, and that only responded to its master. It was the reason why Floria had been chosen as a guinea pig, using an inferior specimen to check if the skinwalker armor would interfere with the body-swapping process before attempting it on their masterpiece. Quilla. With her slender body and her mastery of light magic, she was the closest thing to an ODI they could get. Yet now that very similarity was working against them. Okay, I can't read the tags above any of these buttons, but judging from their positioning, I can guess what they do. I think I can open the hatch, but that would lead us nowhere. She said. Why? Morok asked. Because even though I can open it, the system has a double access to prevent energy leaks. First, it opens on our side. Then we have to throw something inside, and only then will the hatch close from our side and drop the load in the reactor. Well, with the hatch open, a well-placed spell could break the inner door and blow us all to the surface. Quilla cut him short. We need someone to sacrifice themselves, put them in the hatch, maybe loaded with all the alchemical tools we can find, so that once we drop them inside the reactor, they can detonate themselves while the system is sealed and activate the failsafe. Yeah, 2 problems. 1, I'm not going to jump. Second, we've got no alchemical tool. Mr. Blue Skin groped me for good as well. I've nothing left. He didn't grope me. Quilla really hoped that what the ODI had performed was just a body search. Thank Lith. The armor had shielded her from any probing and body examination. Sure thing, sweetheart. The bastard was so thorough with me that I almost expected he would ask me out. Morok sneered. Back to business. How do we stop it? Quilla looked at Morok, calculating her odds of throwing him down the hatch. Worst case scenario, it wouldn't help Lith, but she would still get rid of him. Yet she was aware that some golems might still be on the loose, and she couldn't afford being distracted. We need to capture a flesh golem or Gaku. That bitch betrayed us, so in my book, she's expendable. Quilla replied. To be fair, Gaku had betrayed no one. Just like Quilla back at the academy, she had been enslaved. The ODI had permanently altered her life force, making the slave item impossible to remove without killing her. Can't we just throw a couple of assistants inside and see how it goes? They are much easier prey. Morok proposed. Yes, we could, but we still need something to detonate inside. Otherwise, we would just add new fuel to the reactor. Quilla's reply shocked the tyrant. He was just teasing her, never expecting that she would actually agree to such a heartless plan. Quilla was disgusted by her own weakness just as much as she was from that of her colleagues. The lives of her sister and her best friend were at stake. To her, a couple of rambling idiots were now a small price to pay to save their lives. Lith stood up, watching at Rizzo walking towards them. The God's Will array was gone and ready to be activated again at any moment. Unlike Jireh, Rizzo was a master swordsman. With his strong body and the power of the elements coursing through his body, he was certain to be able to take care of Lith. Chapter 722. Rizzo was the one that was going to take Floria's body. The other ODI might consider her ugly due to her height and strength, but to a fighter, she was just perfect. /U003C, get away from my vessel, kid. I'd hate for my new form to be tainted by the blood of a filthy beast. /U003E Rizzo's movements were calm and controlled while he pointed his sword against Lith as a challenge. Fuck off, Lith replied, unleashing all of the spells he had kept at the ready for Jireh. The 2 men didn't understand each other's words, but their faces spoke volumes. Rizzo's was full of pride and contempt, whereas Lith's was brimming with unbridled rage and killing intent. 2 hands made of living streams of lightning, each one the size of a person, clutched on the ODI while a jet stream of black flames pierced through his chest. Lith's Tier 5 spell's Final Sunset and Death Grip struck Rizzo to no avail. The Sword Master laughed while activating his Great Fortress Armor's enchantment. By imbuing it with mana, It generated an energy barrier that blocked the incoming attacks. Its limitation was that it required a lot of mana to protect its master from such powerful prolonged spells, yet mana wasn't an issue for Rizzo. The reactor made it the absolute defense, with no weak points. /U003C, not bad, kid. I wish I had some decent meat for a barbecue. Your flames make you a poor excuse of a mage, but an excellent stove. /U003E Rizzo laughed, showing the monster that a true noble didn't need the gods' will array to prevail. Solus quickly analyzed the armor and gave Lith the results of her observations. Hence, that armor is almost perfect, she thought. Thanks, Solus. It's just as I predicted. This guy is just a moron that uses a tool without having any idea about how it works. Let's teach him a lesson. Lith replied. Gyra had been a difficult opponent, and Rizzo appeared to be even worse, yet Lith thought nothing of him. After watching Yandra die between his arms, after seeing Floria being tortured, he could feel something twisting inside of himself, clawing to escape. He could feel it in the low rumble of the earth around him, in the unnatural warmth of the air in the room. Burning inside of him, there was a black flame born of force and will that for some reason couldn't find its way out. The ODI had taken a lot from Lith. The thought of being able to put an end to their entire race by killing those in front of him was the best payback he could think of. Lith moved his spells, making them flank Rizzo and leaving his front exposed before hurling a river of origin flames which started to attack more than just the barrier, striking at its very enchantment. /U003C Origin Flames? Gunna, it seems we've got you a furnace. /U003E Rizzo laughed again, but the laughter died when he noticed that there was no end to the flames. Lith kept inhaling and exhaling as fast as he could, piling up more blue flames than he ever did before. /U003C. It must be a monster, not an emperor beast. Only monsters are crazy enough to waste their strength like that. /U003E Rizzo said. The first wave did nothing to his barrier. The second and the third produced no effect as well, but from the fourth onwards he felt that something was wrong. No matter how much water magic he used to cool the surrounding air, Rizzo felt burning. You idiot. Gunna screamed inside his head. Our bodies were modified to withstand infinite mana, not your armor. The ODI had no concept of pseudo-core, but they had learned from experience that there was no enchanted object capable of perfectly channeling mana, not even those made of adamant. That was not because of a metal's fault, but due to the crafted pseudo-core being unable to process the constant flow of energy. A pseudo-core was just like a mana core. If abused, it would overload and explode. Unlike a living being, however, there was no risk of an abomination being born, only of junk. Lith had aimed for the armor first, to strip his conceited opponent of an advantage that in the latest stages of the fight, when they were both exhausted, might have been decisive. Now, instead, the great fortress armor pseudo-core was already on the verge of collapsing, before the fight even started. While Gunna cursed him for his incompetence in handling her masterpiece, Rizzo finally activated the God's Will array. Alas, it was too late. The two spells from Lith, his origin flames, and the powerful explosion that struck Rizzo's back were the final nail in the coffin of the ancient armor. Even though she was still shocked and traumatized from the recent events, Floria refused to be just a spectator. While Lith hammered the barrier, she was taking care of the body-swapping machine. Countless blades made of ice, fire, and earth had cut the entire device into pieces no bigger than a cup of tea. First, she had disposed of the stone table to make her weapons. Then she had cut off all the cables in sight. And finally, she had struck at the protruding mana crystals, making sure that their opponent would shield them from the conflagration with his own body. Suddenly, the great fortress armor was just a heavy lump of metal, offering no more protection to Rizzo's exposed head and arms due to the collapse of its energy field. To add insult to injury, the ODI discovered that not even God's Will could do anything against origin flames. The array had just been created, but the blue flames were already eating at its entire structure, greatly reducing its effectiveness. Rizzo could turn it on and off to once again reset it, but that way nothing would stop the origin flames from turning him into charcoal. I'm going to search for a golem. You stay here and don't touch anything. After a few tries, Quilla had already understood the mana reactor's basic commands. Her problem was still the same. She needed a sacrifice loaded with enough firepower to damage the reactor's internal mechanism, but without damaging its outer shell. A flesh golem was her best bet. During her imprisonment, she had all the time she needed to think about how to take them down, and had ended cursing her own stupidity for not realizing it sooner. Yandra had been right since the beginning. Fighting was the wrong move for Quilla. Are you sure you don't need a bodyguard? Those things are nasty. Morok asked. Damn sure. I might need your help to move them, though. Quilla went downstairs, making as much noise as she could. She had no idea where the constructs could be hidden, but she was certain that the ODI had to keep them close. They had shown her multiple times that without the golem's warping array, they were incapable of using dimensional magic. Once back in the lower reactor room, she used her Forge Master spells to scan the walls and search for recharging arrays. Her efforts triggered a hidden mechanism that released the last 2 flesh golems. The rest had been destroyed, which was the reason why the ODI had ordered them to remain hidden. Chapter 723. The Colossi moved towards her, but Quilla's next move froze them on the spot. Instead of infusing her armor with mana to better defend herself, she shape-shifted it off, remaining in her underwear. The golem's first priority was her safety. They couldn't harm her. They stepped back as she advanced until they had their backs against the wall. They couldn't touch her without being deactivated, but there was no spell in their arsenal weak enough to not kill a half-naked normal human. Constructs had no access to first magic, only to the spells that they had been imbued with, and flesh golems were war machines. Quilla placed her hands on them and turned the normally unstoppable dreadnoughts into huge piles of stone in a split second. Only when she was sure that they posed no threat to her did she put her armor back on. Then, she used a float spell on the golems and brought them to the reactor's upper floor. How the heck did you manage to capture 2 constructs without a scratch? Morok's genuine surprise at the sight of the golems made her sigh in relief. Quilla was afraid he might have been following her and peeped the whole scene. Finesse, she replied. Now our question is if it's better to throw them both at once or one at a time and study how the reactor behaves before making a final attempt. Quilla used both Scanner and her Forge Mastering spell to search for a self-destruct mechanism. As a Forge Master, she knew how important it was to not give the enemy the opportunity to study a masterpiece. Once she found the mechanism, she placed the constructs on the hatch before triggering it. The people grafted inside the golems looked at her with eyes filled with gratitude, almost making Quilla feel guilty. In any other time, she would have worried about finding a way to save them from their destiny and give their body back to them. Almost. She was now at war, and no matter her oath as a healer or how innocent those people were, they still remained her enemies. The hatch opened, making the flesh golems fall on the inner metal door that unlocked as soon as the outer door was closed. The constructs fell down into the pit the mana reactor was, filled with world energy, elemental forces, and the emerald green light of mana. Their flesh was instantly consumed while their stone bodies withstood the maelstrom around them long enough to almost reach the bottom of the reactor. The following explosion broke the balance between the 3 energies at work, forcing the machine to a stop. The reactor was still full of mana, but no more would be produced until the emergency wasn't solved. The world energy was now free to return where it belonged, making the shaking of the ground increase as a silver pillar of light descended from the sky, right above Litha's position. There was a reason why the ODI had been forced to merge all in one body, why they had abandoned their research in a hurry, and why almost no trace of their passage but ruins remained. During the Great War, while the people of the Galen continent fought for their freedom and the ODI did their worst to prolong the existence of their dying race, Mogr had passed its judgment on them, deeming them unworthy. The Guardians had mobilized, ending the war that would have lasted a few more years in a matter of hours. The ODI knew about the Guardians, as well as that the only way they had to fight against such powerful creatures was to use the Guardians' best weapon against them. By trapping the world energy in the mana reactor, not only did they achieve the key to unlimited power, but they also hid from both Mogr and its Guardians. Even in the case that Quilla were to be discovered, the ODI believed that they had enough weapons to take the Guardians on and beat them at their own game. As long as the mana reactor was operational, the Guardians would be diminished, while the ODI would be unstoppable, and the gods' will array would allow them to trample even Mogers will over the elements. As long as the mana reactor was operational, which wasn't the case anymore. The world energy flooded Kolua's underground floors, triggering the world tribulation that had been forcefully stopped since the moment Lith had listened to the words of the dying golems. \U003C, oh shit. \U003 Irizo said, unaware that now both humans were finally capable of understanding his language and vice versa. He had fought his whole life on the front lines. He could never forget the feeling that was now covering his whole body in a cold sweat. The feeling of the presence of a guardian. A silver pillar descended from the sky, while the normally hidden black one emerged from the ground, as if the fingers of two opposite gods were connecting right in the space Lith occupied. Finally, the thing inside of him stopped clawing and erupted from his whole body, covering it in red and black scales, while two curved horns emerged from the sides of his forehead. Floria was so shocked that she almost forgot about Rizzo. She had seen Lith transformed, but never like that. She had never seen the 4 upside-down wings on his back, the tail, the horns, nor the 7 eyes all opened at once. An inhuman roar erupted from his fangs-filled maw as his body grew past the 2 meters, 6 feet 7 inches, and the whole room turned pitch black. Countless eyes opened on every centimeter of the walls, ceiling, and floor, staring at Rizzo in hatred. Fearing for his life, the ODI decided to give his all, releasing a Tier 3 spell from his sword. Even though the God's Will array was weakened, it was still capable of turning the simple lightning into something that exceeded even a Tier 5 magic spell cast by a genius on Manohar's level. The magical formation had been devised as an anti-guardian weapon for a reason. The spell was faster and stronger than anything Lith had ever seen. It moved so quickly that even if he had seen it forming with life vision, even with his body infused with air magic, he couldn't dodge it from so up close. It pierced through the layer of orichalcum covering Lith's head, through the thick scales and bones protecting his brain. Realizing that nothing was enough to stop such a force of nature, Solus did the only thing that she could. She used the split second the spell needed to overpower so many layers of protection to slip inside Lith's skull and cover his brain with her stone body. Lith's armor vaporized, his skull caved in, and Solus was turned into small pebbles. Yet not a single spark of electricity nor bone fragment damaged Lith's vital organ, allowing invigoration to rejuvenate him in only one breath, thanks to the massive amount of world energy enveloping him. That was damn close. Thank you so much, Solus. Lith thought, yet only silence ensued. Solus. Lith could feel an immense void inside of himself where Solus's light usually was. He could still manipulate the glove, his pocket dimension, everything. Yet his best friend was lost to him. An all-too-human scream of grief made the cave tremble so much that both Floria and Rizzo, who were still shocked at seeing Lith alive, thought that the whole of Mogar was about to collapse above their heads. Chapter 724. That's Lith's voice. Something must have happened to him. Quilla Triple checked the mana reactor. A lot of red lights signaled that the device had stopped working, and the lack of all the buzzing sounds that had previously filled the air confirmed the success of her strategy. Yet instead of declining, the rumble of the earth was actually worse than before. Cursing her bad luck, she ran toward the room where the fight was taking place despite the fear of the operating table and of the blue monster who wanted to steal her life still burned vividly in her mind. Wait, I don't think you should go. You can't possibly help him. Morok ran after Quilla, trying to stop her. He could imagine how hard Lith had worked to hide his real nature and knew that the ODI wasn't an enemy that could be underestimated. On top of that, even though he couldn't see the silver and the black pillar with his human eyes, he could feel an enormous power at work. Such a small human like Quilla was likely to be incinerated simply by stepping too close to such a force of nature. He grabbed her by the shoulder, forcing Quilla to stop. She followed her father's teaching, using the ranger's yanking motion to add his momentum to her own and kick him in the nuts with all the strength she had. Quilla was tired of his nonsense. She wouldn't waste a single moment listening to Morok, not while she could actually do something to help her family. If Lith and Floria lost the battle, she was dead anyway. Quilla much preferred spending her last moments with those she loved rather than with an annoying prick. Morok yelped while grabbing his crotch and fell to his side. Beast or not, enchanted protection or not, it would take him some time to recover. When Quilla opened the metal door, she couldn't believe her own eyes. Floria was still there, sitting on the ground and chanting one spell after the other despite the tears streaming from her eyes. The room seemed to be out of a nightmare, filled with eyes of all shapes and sizes staring at the fight, while inhuman screams coming from its walls filled the air. In the middle of it, someone that looked like the Odi Quilla knew but who wasn't him was battling to the death with a monstrous creature. Floria wasn't crying because she was afraid of death, nor because she had any idea of what had just happened. She was crying because the thing in front of her, somehow, was exactly as she had always imagined Lith to be. She had always known that he was filled with a pain and anguish that usually he hid from the rest of the world, something that she had only caught a glimpse of from time to time. Now it was all laid bare in front of her, in a storm of claws, snarls, and fury. It was the most inhuman and yet human being she had ever seen. She was crying because the darkness surrounding them resonated with that pain, allowing Floria to share his grief and shed the tears that Lith couldn't anymore. After the first lightning, Rizzo didn't have the time to cast another that Lith had darted towards him, in a flurry of origin flames and fists. The first punch had been strong enough to lift Rizzo from the ground, sending him crashing against the back wall. His once prized fortress armor was now deeply bent and bore the mark of Lith's fist. Rizzo's earth and light fusion allowed him to remain conscious, but the strike had brought the both of them outside the God's will array, forcing him to undo the old magical formation and create a new one. That split second had been long enough that Lith had struck the ODI's face so hard and so many times to almost rip Rizzo's head off. One of his eyes was swelled and closed. Many of his teeth were now on the floor while his nose, broken in many places, bled profusely. Rizzo hadn't taken the onslaught idly. He was a master swordsman, and his blade was still in perfect condition. The eternal blade was the apex of the ODI weaponry. He had stabbed, cut, and deflected Litha's arms at each and every one of his attacks, but the monster didn't care. The silvery armor covering his curved scales deflected most of the impacts, and every wound started to heal the moment it was opened. Lith was using darkness fusion, but it wasn't the lack of pain that allowed him to fight in such a frenzied way. It was the unbridled fury for having once lost once again someone precious to him. Solus is gone. I will not hear her laugh or cry anymore. She will not be with me the next time I'm happy or sad. She will not scold me when I do something stupid or insensitive. I'm once again alone, and it's all your fault. You took her away from me. Lith thought while his hands turned the orichalcum of the now-dead fortress armor to shreds, bringing him just a few centimeters away from the beating heart of his hated enemy. Until that moment, Rizzo had completely focused on protecting his head, but cuts and bruises were being inflicted upon his now exposed flesh, forcing him to lower his blade. You have to end this quickly, Guna said in his head. Your precious little wench has destroyed the body-swapping machine, and the mana reactor has stopped working. Once the stored mana goes dry, you'll not last a second. Rizzo hated to agree with her, just as he hated the mage's guts. Yet there was no point in denying the truth, so he used first magic and the green array to surround himself with white flames, forcing the monster to retreat and giving himself the time he needed to heal his injuries. The first thing that Solus saw when she woke up from the darkness that had shrouded her was a luscious sea of green. The soft grass tickled her feet, while a gentle breeze made her light bronze hair dance in the air. She had no idea where she was, but she felt at peace. All of her pains and worries appeared like something distant in the past. The only thing she wanted was to lay down on the grass and stare at the blue sky above her head. Am I dead? She asked while the memories of the recent events made her snap out of her reverie. This is nothing like what I saw in Litha's memories, and, by my maker, my skin is pink. I'm human. I'm really human. She tried to conjure a mirror of eyes to look at her own face, but nothing happened. She couldn't feel her mana, nor any of her mystical senses seemed to work. To make matters worse, the only thoughts she could hear were her own. Oh dear, it's been so long since the last time I had a visitor. Let me wear something you can relate to. A disembodied voice said inside Solus's head, making her yelp in surprise. The ground rose, twisted, and turned, until the lump of mud in front of Solus looked exactly like Alina down to the smallest detail. The only difference was her hair being of the 6 colors of the elements instead of light brown with shades of red. Chapter 725. Where are we? Who are you? More importantly, am I dead? Is Lith dead too? Solus asked. She felt as if she was about to faint, yet she was physically incapable of doing it. You are where no living being is supposed to be, inside of my consciousness. As for who I am, usually you call me by many names. The All-Father, the Great Mother, but I think that recently Mogur is the most popular. The Alina thing replied. Wait, what? Why am I here? If I'm not dead, why I don't have any of my powers? Solus was only getting more confused with each answer she received. You would be dead if you still had your original body, but the one Minadion bestowed upon you is too strong for a mere lightning to kill you. Not to mention that your life force is linked to the humans. You're in a state very close to death, and since I was there when it happened, the most human part of your mind naturally returned to me. You don't have powers because you don't need them here. You're safe. Unlike him. A wave of Mogur's hand made their surroundings disappear, returning Solus to the ODI's underground complex. Solus suddenly realized that something was wrong. Mogur's presence was calm like that of any normal human, but there were 3 more pillars other than the one enveloping Lith. They were much bigger than his silver pillar and so powerful that even in her current state, just being so close to them covered Solus in a cold sweat. What are you doing to Lith? What's the meaning of the silver pillar, and who or what are those things? Solus pointed at the remaining 3 pillars surrounding Kulla. I'm not doing anything that your friend didn't ask for himself. He calls for me so wearily often, but this time I answered his call. Mogur shook her head, shape-shifting into Rena. The silver pillar is the way I communicate with those like him. As for the others, the second wave of her hand gave Solus the impression that the whole world was zooming out. She could now see with her eyes 3 enormous beasts surrounding Kulla. A golden griffin, a black-scaled dragon, and a white phoenix. Each one of them was standing on its hind legs, which seemed to reach down to Mogur's core, while their heads stood so tall that they were able to pierce the skies. The closest comparison between the dragon in front of her and the emerald dragon they had met inside Huriel she could think of was that of a volcano and a match. They are my guardians. I brought them here to pass my judgment in the case that your friend dies. Mogur's warm and motherly smile, despite the dire circumstances Lith, Floria, and Quilla were, gave Solus the creeps. For too long those bastards hid from my sight, sucking my blood for their filthy experiments. I usually don't mind mosquitoes, but this one has got too big and too annoying to let it live. If you already have guardians, what do you need Lith for? Can't you see he is suffering? Solus saw Lith's 7 eyes burning like torches. She had no idea if it was either due to his rage or the tears that in such a form looked like flames. Even without their mind link, just by looking at his face, she could tell that he was grieving. Life is suffering, child. You should know it better than anyone else. Mogur sneered, assuming Journey's features. I still need many pieces on my chessboard, and so far, your friend fits the bill. Do you know why magical beasts are born with 2 elements? It marks what their purpose is, what they are supposed to be. Take the griffin, for example. Its elements are light and air. Together, they bring order and change. That's why the griffin's duty is to nurture what already exists. Back when people still believed in the gods, it was considered the lord of prosperity. The dragon is made of fire and air, elements that complement each other. Both of them are shapeless and intangible. Together, they bring the passion and the open-mindedness necessary to those who seek knowledge. That's why dragons are usually wise, and the first dragon was considered the lord of wisdom. Last, but not least, the phoenix. Its elements are light and darkness, twin elements that despite being polar opposites cannot live without each other. Together, they are an unstoppable force of death and rebirth. For something new to be born, something old must die. That's the oldest rule of the balance. The phoenix embodies the radical changes that living beings must undergo in order to survive, both as individuals and as society. Its conflictual nature made the first phoenix the lord of war. Sometimes, however, change is not enough. There are things in every world that are simply born wrong, and no matter how much they change, there's no fixing them, like the ODI. Do you know what are the elements your friend was born with? fire and darkness. Together, they don't nurture, don't protect, nor do they change. Their only purpose is to cleanse and disinfect, to get rid of what is toxic. Too many mistakes on the evolutionary ladder have brought me to agree with your friend. I need a lord of destruction. Mogur pointed her slender finger at Litha's proto-guardian form. By the way, are you sure that you can afford to stay here and chatter? Things aren't going well for him. Solus followed the images in front of her, noticing that there was more in play than the physical battle between Lith and Rizzo. Now that the reactor was still, its prisoners were finally able to truly die. The souls that it had trapped for centuries were finally free. Yet while some turned into shooting stars and disappeared in the sky, others were now free to look for their revenge upon their captors. All those whose hatred and rage was strong enough that it would have turned them into undead if they still a shred of a body to cling to, found in the abyss erupting from Litha's solar beacon. Each one of them tainted his mind and body, trying to force him to become the instrument of their reckoning. They projected into his mind all the atrocities they had endured, all the loved ones they had lost, adding their fury to his own, driving Lith on the verge of madness. They couldn't offer him power, only rage, but that was something that he had plenty already. Feeling his body getting invaded by foreign feelings, Lith focused on Karl's death, on Yandra's, and on the painful void that Solus's absence had left. The black fire inside of him burned brighter, attacking the dead souls clinging to him and forcing them to release their hold on him. The spirits changed their tactic, replacing their features with those of his loved ones, asking him to avenge them. Rizzo didn't miss the opportunity that the chaos Litha's mind currently had created for him. He dispelled both the white flames and the God's will array, charging forward in a downward slash that would have split the monster asunder. Lith managed to partially dodge, but the strike still managed to chop his left arm off. The pain snapped Lith out of his frenzy, and before Rizzo could even gloat for his success, black tendrils erupted from Litha's shoulder as well as from his amputated limb, reattaching it in a split second.